Well, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Global Sustainable Aviation Forum at COP28. It's a pleasure to have you all with us, and very happy that this is taking place on Transport Day, and grateful for the support of the COP28 presidency, with whom we've been working to prepare for the next 4 hours of discussion. And although we do have a decent chunk of time, we actually have a very packed agenda with a lot of information to be provided. So keeping on schedule is going to be important, and I don't want to fall into the normal COP trap of getting behind time, but it looks like we haven't achieved that so far. I think the level of interest in this discussion, certainly the number of people that wanted to speak today, is a sign that not only is the industry really making progress in our decarbonisation strategy, but also that other sectors are starting to take an interest as well, and that's a good thing. I'm going to swap the order around a little bit because we've got one of our first speakers who needs to head off very quickly to go to another event. This is very normal during COP. And so I'm going to ask first Jane Hoope to say a couple of words before you need to leave. We have a slight microphone issue today as well, so I'm a microphone bearer. Please.
Thank you, Haldane. So a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. Apologies for leaving you very quickly. We have a series of events today, it's Transport Day, and we want to bring the good news from ICAO to that meeting. And it's Transport Day, the day that we are going to say, we did it. And that's how I want to start my address here. We did it. 1 year ago, we had decided on align the aviation sector with the Paris Agreement temperature goals. And we decided to have a long-term goal for the net zero 2050, just 1 year ago. Preparing to that, we have done so many studies. You know, aviation only takes decisions in ICAO after we do a lot of studies. And the studies show clean energy would be the one that would be really providing the best shot for us in addressing emissions. So the big chunk will come from cleaner energy. And then we focus this year really all of our efforts to put forward a framework so that that could happen. And in just a few days before this meeting, we have had a big breakthrough where we got the agreement on a framework. And we have an aspirational goal for the short term, 2030. We will be reducing 5% on the CO2 just from clean energy. So we will continue to do the other measures, technology, operations, but from clean energy, 5% reductions of CO2 by 2030 is our commitment. So what we have to say is this framework, it allows the states in the different circumstances, not all the states are starting from the same point, to catch up, to receive the capacity building, the means of implementation they need to get there. And we have taken very important decisions in various areas. I'll just highlight something. The regulatory framework is very important. We have been working on that 15 years. We have a lot of good work done through CORSIA, which is our global offsetting scheme. And sustainability of those fuels is paramount. We go nowhere with sustainable fuels without very clear sustainability criteria. And the way we chose, and I'm saying criteria, because, you know, we, in that framework, we are agnostic on methods, on processes, on feedstocks. The way we chose to do that, to make a real level playing field globally, is to give the criteria. You pass, you fail. You pass your sustainable aviation fuel. You fail, you're not. So that was a big decision of the meeting, to use that basis, this criteria, throughout the world. And that will allow each state in their own circumstances to reach that out. So you have the framework, guys. And when I see this audience here today, Haldane, you are the doers. So go for it. So what do we need? We need smart cooperation. It's unprecedented cooperation, but smart cooperation. I'm very concerned with the very little and resources we have. A myriad of new initiatives every single day that goes to different directions, and most of them are repeating things that are already done. Don't do that. let's concentrate in the main initiatives, put all our efforts into those initiatives. Under Corsi, we already have an amazing MRV. When you're talking about monitoring, reporting, etc. on aviation, build upon it. So let's do smart cooperation. Let's choose the programs that are really to stay, that are really delivering. And I invite you all to be part of ACTSAF. In ICAO, we had ACTSAF before we had the framework because we want to include industry in our partnerships, and it's working beautifully. Second thing, we have done so much. We are terrible in explaining it and announcing it to the world. Please, let's do more outreach. Let's talk about what aviation is doing. Let's make the world understand where we are, because we are so advanced, and sometimes I hear people talking about things that we have resolved 15 years ago. The third thing, we have the framework. We have the direction. And when we talked to the financial organizations before, they said, we need consistency, we need predictability, we need a framework. We did it. Now, bring us the money. We need the money to do it. So help us get the money. And with that, Alden, I think you will have a very busy agenda. We will be having a series of meetings today exactly to pass the word and to make sure the world understands that aviation clean energy transition is on. Thank you, Alden.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. Good luck with the rest of your day. Yeah, bring us the money. Key message there, which I would echo as well. Before we get into the detail of the session today, I just wanted to go over some of the thoughts that we have within the aviation community of how we get to the decarbonization pathway. Before that, I wanted to say a special thanks to the organizers of the event and also those that have supported us to make today possible, and you can see them on screen now. Aviation connects the world. Before COVID, over 4.5 billion passengers were carried across the air transportation system, which includes airlines, airports, air traffic control providers, the makers of aircraft and engines, and the whole supply chain. Perhaps most important on this slide is the last statistic, the connectivity provided by the nearly 50,000 routes served. This is not only the global hubs that we all know about, it's small community airports, small island states, landlocked countries. It's a connection to the world with tourism and jobs, with education and health. And those statistics, the tourism we support through flying, the trade that we transport, help support some 87.7 million jobs globally. This is set to continue with our analysis showing that by 2038, we could support 143 million jobs around the world. That growth, of course, is going to come mainly from emerging economies as they unlock the benefits of aviation. And I always find this map quite fascinating, seeing the shift in the global center of gravity, not only of the economic center of gravity of the world, but also aviation activity in the coming decades. And it's a clear sign that more of the world will be opening up and connecting. But of course, that connectivity also comes with a downside of CO2 emissions. Acknowledging that, the industry became one of the first in the world to adopt a series of global green climate goals back in 2009. And 2 years ago, we increased the ambition of those goals to reach net zero by 2050. This was adopted across aviation. All airlines, airports, air traffic control authorities, and the makers of aircraft and engines through the Air Transport Action Group took up this challenge. And a year later, so did the world's governments in a landmark decision at ICAO. This was not a decision that we took lightly. We knew that we had improved operational efficiency significantly. The red line here on this slide shows where our emissions would be if we kept operating our 1990 fleet in 2050. And the blue dotted line shows where we would be if traffic grew with our current fleet mix. So how to get from that blue dotted line down to net zero, that's what we're all focused on now. Our own net zero pathway analysis, Waypoint 2050, shows 3 different scenarios for how to get there. And we're going to explore the main elements of that through today's sessions. There are 4 main levers of action. We're going to start with a deep dive on sustainable aviation fuels. before looking at the role of operations and infrastructure, new technology, and then a big picture wrap-up of how all these elements play together with other considerations of decarbonisation as well. So that's the plan for today. Before we get started, I want to introduce the speakers we have here on stage with us and who will provide some opening insights. First of all, I'm going to ask Annie Petsonk to provide some perspective on where we are now and where we need to go. Annie is the Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs at the US Department of Transport. So Annie, please, you've got a microphone just there. A few words from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Haldane. It's great to see folks here. I've seen some of you very recently at the CAF3 conference, and very glad to see you again here. And for those I didn't see then, glad to see you here. The CAF3 meeting really was a very important milestone, I think. Both Haldane and Jane have outlined the overall progress that the industry has made in terms of industry and governments setting goals. But the CAF3 meeting, frankly, I think achieved something very important. First of all, in terms of the array of interests there, I want to particularly call out the Africa group, because the Africa group coming into the meeting, I think, was understandably very concerned. I'm not speaking for the Africa group. I want to commend the engagement. I see Francis here and others. Just want to particularly thank the thoughtfulness and engagement from the Africa group. Let's face it, aviation connectivity within Africa is not what it should be. And we need to improve that connectivity while we move aviation to a more sustainable footing. And so having a CAF outcome of the 5% target that Jane mentioned, with the full and enthusiastic and positive support of Africa, recognizing the importance for Africa of capacity building, technology transfer, and support, it's very, very important development. And that means that those of us from industrialized countries need to look very carefully at how we are working with African countries and other countries around the world to build capacity to see where the supply chains will come from. In the United States, our Federal Aviation Administration has taken a leadership step there in terms of what we call Project 93, which is a partnership among our leading universities, partnering with universities around the world, including in Africa, to do the research to see where, not only where the supply chains are going to come from, but where the refining is going to happen. Building on that CAF3 outcome, I personally and my leadership at the Department of Transportation have spent the time since CAF3, which only just happened, right? I mean, some of you are still jet-lagged from it, talking to investors, saying to investors, here's this outcome. You asked for predictability. The industry has now set a target. And you know what? We're hearing from investors, we're starting to see that sustainable aviation fuel, low-carbon aviation fuel, other aviation fuels that can achieve net zero emissions, those are real things. You have set the standards for it in ICAO. Now we have a set of standards and a predictable outcome that we can begin to look at real investment. Is that investment going to happen tomorrow? We're doing our darndest to try to see that to happen. But I also want to add, yesterday I attended a transportation event here where Ali Zaidi, the Deputy Advisor to the President of the United States on climate, spoke. And Ali, who's a very smart guy, if you haven't met him, I encourage you to meet him. He said, you know, very important here is not only to take a technology approach, which our sector has been wonderful at through CAPE and fantastic analysis. Mariam has led some of this analysis, and many others here have led it, but through a systems approach. I said, Ali, what do you mean by a systems approach? He said, well, look, the fuels that you're going to need are going to take energy to produce. Where are you going to get the energy from? Are you sitting down to talk with the energy producers, including the electricity producers who are facing serious competition for green electrons, and saying, okay, what's the grid capacity? What's the generation capacity? Where do we need to plan? What about the workforce? Haldane, you have fantastic slides showing the importance of employment generated by this industry. Are we preparing the workforce of tomorrow, today? those kinds of system approaches across what traditionally have been silos, whether they are technology silos or industry silos, we need to take a much broader approach. Some of you have heard me talk about the 3 C's, cooperation, collaboration, communication. Let's take those 3 C's and employ them in a systems approach going forward so that we can meet these goals of the 5% by 2030 and the net zero by 2050. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annie. No, and preparing the workforce is going to be incredibly important. Something we are working with Cranfield University on tomorrow afternoon. We've got an online session with them trying to figure out how do we get the research community, the academic community to start preparing not only the research that we need, but the workforce that we need into the future as well. So that's certainly keen on our minds. So thank you for that, Annie. Next up, Miriam Al-Balushi is the State Lead Negotiator for Aviation and Climate Change from our hosts here at COP28, doing such a great job of hosting us as well, the United Arab Emirates. Miriam, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good morning. I think my voice is changing. I'm not jet lagged, but I'm recovering from COP3, which happened exactly 10 days ago here in Dubai. And we were so proud to host more than 1,000 in the room and more than 40 ministers in that event. So it was really a big event for us, and we are proudly happy that it was successful outcome of that event. And it's, I remember we keep saying that we need to send the signals to the global community that aviation is doing a lot, but aviation has been doing a lot. And as Jane said, and in the slides, that since 2009-10, there was a tremendous work done by different groups, different levels of aviation industry stakeholders. I'm delighted to represent again UAE here and show or give some insights on what we are doing. First of all, Dubai Global Framework for Aviation Fuel. We like to call it Dubai Global Framework because we deserve the title. So it's very important milestone as well for the community, aviation community, and it's just giving us some more support as a government to push whatever we started. I think I remember I announced in the last intervention, the CAF, that we are working with the SAF policy, and it's very close to be announced to the public with the details. And having also the SAF roadmap, the national roadmap in place, it's giving us a big responsibility to move forward. And I can see many familiar faces here. You remember the day when we announced the aircraft, and number of stakeholders are here from the aircraft group as well. And this is also a very important milestone for us. We are assuring as a government, including the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure and General Civil Aviation Authority, that we are supporting our stakeholders in such initiatives, and definitely we want to have it executed properly, and we want to see it moving from the paper documentation to actual physical reality. We've been also engaged in many discussions with ICAO on different topics and different groups as well. And what we have achieved in the last decade, more than 1 decade, in all the basket of measures, it's really remarkable for the sector itself. I know, as Jane said, it's not about just adapting the resolutions or the global framework. We will have a lot of work. New tasks are coming to the CAPE as well, the Committee of Aviation Environment Protection. And UAE is, with all its expertise, is still committed to collaborate in all these working groups, including the Fuel Task Group. And we are proud that we were, along with Saudi Arabia, one of the states or the leaders that worked on the LCAF, low carbon aviation fuel. I know still people are confused about the lower carbon aviation fuel, but we assure we did all the analysis, scientific work with the international organization through our expertise, scientists in the 2 organizations, Aramco and ADNOC. And if we were not confident with such move, we won't announce it or we won't support it. So LCAF is a must. We know SAF is the future, but LCAF is a transitioning fuel towards SAF, and the government is fully support on the energy transition. So by the time we reach to 2030 or 2050 with the quantity that we are aiming for, we hope that LCAF also is certified and available in the market, because this is another challenge for LCAF as well. So all these efforts is done to make sure that aviation is still alive. When I say alive, because we've been through the shutdown. Everyone remember that all the airlines were grounded, airports were closed, and we couldn't connect. And this is good that this year and last year we came together again with different ambitious goals personally. So I hope that we move gradually with the wisdom that we don't harm the two sectors, aviation as well as energy. The good thing is happening now that we as an aviation sector, we brought the energy sector on board with us, which is, honestly, it's not the nature of ICAO or even as GCA, General Civil Aviation Authority. Today, when we chair the committees, it's a mix of aviation experts and energy as well. So we are also learning through this journey, and we are trying to make sure that whatever we are producing to the globe is helping the whole community to move forward, and we don't stop the growth and the connectivity. As you know, it's very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mariam is such a font of knowledge about the process and the technical work, because you've been so heavily involved over the years with that as well. But it's so important for us to start branching out and talking to other sectors. That's a very important message. So, in order to give us some inspiration to get the rest of the day going, we're finally delighted to have with us Sheikh Moza bin Marwan Al Maktoum, who is not only a former commercial airline pilot and current police helicopter pilot, but has founded Shehana, the Women in Aviation Association. So thank you very much for joining us, and please give us some thoughts about the sustainable future of aviation.
Thank you. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow global citizens, it is indeed both a privilege and an honor to stand before you here today at this distinguished conference on climate change, where the urgency of global sustainability echoes within each of us. As we convene at COP28, I bring with me a perspective rooted in my experience in the aviation industry, particularly as captain pilot of the Dubai Police Air Wing and as an advocate for sustainable practices. In my journey as a pilot, I've realized the aviation industry has a profound impact on the environment. It is time to recognize and amplify the contributions of women in aviation. Their leadership can drive sustainable practices within the industry, influencing decisions on fuel-efficient technologies, sustainable aviation fuel, and carbon offset programs. Diversity in the aviation workforce brings creativity and innovation, which are two crucial elements in finding sustainable solutions for environmental challenges. In parallel to the pioneering role of women in aviation, the UAE has embarked on a journey to empower women in various sectors, including aviation. In 2017, under the guidance of Her Highness Sheikha Fatima bint Mbarak, the UAE unveiled a national strategy to elevate Emirati women to leadership positions. Today, this vision materializes in Shehana, an international association dedicated to reshaping the aviation industry for women, bearing the name of the female falcon, symbolizing strength and courage. Shehana aspires to cultivate an empowering environment, inspiring Emiratis and women worldwide to explore opportunities in aviation. Through strategic alliances, Shehana aims to dismantle obstacles, establish incentives, and enhance gender balance. As a representative of Shehana, I wholeheartedly trust in the remarkable capabilities of women. particularly Emirati women, to contribute innovatively to the aviation sector. Today, we stand at crossroads of history and responsibility, where the flight paths of women in aviation intersect with the urgent need for climate sustainability. Women are not just passengers, they are navigators, and they are the innovators and the stewards of the future, where contrails of progress are intertwined with ribbons of environmental responsibility. Together, we will explore how these pioneers are not merely passengers on this journey. The urgency of sustainability in aviation goes beyond gender empowerment. It requires a collective and transformative approach. The aviation industry, long criticized for its environmental impact, is at crossroads. Incidents like the Luton runway meltdown serve as stark reminders of the environmental consequences we face. However, amidst these challenges, there are notable breakthroughs that offer hope and direction. Emirates, a prominent player in the aviation sector, achieved a historic milestone with the world's first A380 demonstration flight using 100% sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. This groundbreaking achievement can potentially cut carbon emissions by up to 85%. The SAF used closely mimics conventional jet fuel, ensuring compatibility with existing aircraft systems and paving the way for a more sustainable and eco-friendly aviation future. This demonstration is a crucial step towards standardizing and widely adopting 100% SAF. The aviation industry providing valuable insights into SAF's impact on aircraft performance. Etihad Airways is paving the way by aiming to cut aviation emissions in half in 2050, while doubling the number of flights. As we sit at this critical junction of COP28, let us recognize the urgency and the gaps in our collective efforts. I call upon each one of us to contribute to a sustainable future. Whether you're a passenger, a pilot, or an industry stakeholder, simple steps can be taken to reduce carbon footprint. Choosing more fuel-efficient airlines, supporting sustainable-focused initiatives, and advocating for the use of biofuels are tangible ways we can contribute to a greener future. Let us soar towards a sustainable tomorrow in the wings of today's commitments. The echoes of our actions, whether in the aviation industry or the broader context of climate change, will resound in the wings of generations yet to come. As we navigate the discussions at COP28, let us chart a course forward with collaborations, innovation, and shared commitment to our planet's well-being. The wings of change know no boundaries, and the skies of possibilities are open to all who dare to dream and care for our planet. Together, let us spread our wings of hope and create not just a better future for ourselves, but also for the generations yet to come. Thank you.
Sheikha, thank you very much for those words, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well in the association to help sort of spur that on. And I think if there's any indication of the role that women can play in helping to drive us forward, the four panelists that we had to start the conference off are certainly part of that, and we'll hear from more women aviation leaders throughout the day as well. So thank you all very much. If I can ask you to leave the stage, we can start with the next panel. So thank you very much. And just a reminder, tea, coffee, and snacks will be served throughout the day, so please feel free. It's an informal event. Go out and help yourself as we move on. So now let's turn over to the first presentation of the day. And to lead us through this, I'd like to welcome Yasa Yetiskin from ICF, who will present some of the key statistics to help us with the sustainable aviation fuel discussion, which is going to be the focus for the first hour or so. Yasa, please.
Thank you, Haldane. Hi, everyone. So I'm Yasha Yetishkin from ICF. So as Haldane mentioned, this will be a very brief introduction or very brief presentation on the key statistic around sustainable aviation fuels, mainly focusing on yesterday, today, and the future. Oops, I think that's probably the wrong one. Okay. There we go. Cool. So I would like to start with re-emphasizing the need for sustainable aviation fuels. So there are quite a lot of studies exploring how aviation industry will achieve decarbonization by 2050. And when we look at all these global studies, we see utilization of a basket of measures, but there's one thing that we see in common is that SAF will provide, in most of the scenarios, the biggest chunk of the emission reduction. So 37 to 70% of the emission reduction in aviation industry by 2050 is expected to come from sustainable aviation fuels. So that means we will need a lot of SAF by 2050. But we have been already working on scaling up this industry. So since the first commercial flight with sustainable aviation fuels in 2008, which was 15 years ago, we have sort of created this baby industry. It is still growing, but the next step, which is very important for us, is focusing on actually delivering the near-term targets that we have ahead of us, the capacity that we have announced. But also in the long term, achieving the long-term success will also require climbing this mountain ahead of us, that's for sure, which will require calibrating the direction and the level of investments to correct or the necessary technologies that will enable utilization of wider feedstocks. So when we look at the progress in SAF scaling up, we see an impressive momentum on the supply side and also very strong signals from the demand side. So the production is currently, of course, very limited, but as you see in the chart, it is increasing almost exponentially every single year. And last year, somewhere around 300 kilotons of SAF was produced and fully utilized, and aviation industry paid more than $500 million additional cost for sustainable aviation fuel. So this represents the commitment of the industry as well. And as discussed earlier, as Jane mentioned, the 5% target set by ICAO with more than 100 member states agreeing on this particular target, which is very impressive. More than 40 countries, again, all over the world, have a SAF policy in place or a SAF policy under discussion. And more than 50 airlines across the world have 5% or more SAF utilization target by 2030. So on top of our long-term targets, net zero target by 2050, we have very strong demand signals for the near term as well. And when we look at the announced capacity across the world, so we see more than 130 facilities under development in more than 30 countries today. And these facilities are expected to provide around 23 million tons of production capacity by 2030. So this is, considering where we are today, a huge scale up. And this is mostly being underpinned by the offtake agreements. So today there are more than $45 billion worth of SAF offtake agreements, covering more than 40 million tons of SAF through more than 100 offtake contracts. So there is a huge momentum again ahead of us, and we need to focus on actually delivering these targets and ensuring that these facilities are commissioned successfully. But I think there's one thing to emphasize, because from where we stand today, we were trying to scale or create this industry. We have sort of an industry currently, it is scaling up, but the next big challenge is actually scaling up the advanced SAF technologies, because currently all SAF is coming from HEFA, which is a technology, which is a mature technology we have been utilizing for over decades. to produce actually renewable diesel. So today we need to access a much wider range of feedstocks through the utilization of advanced technologies such as alcohol-to-jet, Fischer-Tropsch, power-to-liquids, to be able to process waste and residues or even water and air with power-to-liquids. So we need to increase the investments for the advanced SAF technologies. Today it is 100%, almost HEFA. When we look at the announced capacity, over 75% is still HEFA, but in the long term, over 90% of SAF needs to come from these advanced technologies. So we need to calibrate the direction of investment to advanced technologies and also increase the level of investments. That was very brief, but the idea was to show that we did this before. We have climbed Mount Everest, we have landed on the moon. So even in SAF industry, we are showing incredible progress. So as long as we stay united and we invest in the right technologies and the supply chain across the technologies, we can also achieve the targets for 2050. Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you, Yasser, for those insights. And I just wanted to add to them very briefly, as I think it's really important to acknowledge that those companies taking the lead here. And Yasser mentioned airlines which have forward purchase commitments to SAF, and they're all listed on this slide. These are for 2030. So next, we have a panel about the challenges and opportunities of sustainable aviation fuel, and I'm delighted to welcome Matt Gorman, Director of Carbon Strategy at Heathrow Airport, to moderate the panel. We'll look at some of the outcomes of CAF3 that we heard about, and the challenges of SAF production and scale-up, and feedstock availability over the coming years, as well as airline commitments. So Matt, please come up on stage with your panel.
Brilliant. Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be here. I've had very strict instructions from Haldane. I can see a big red 45 minutes, which is starting to count down. I'm not allowed to read anyone's biogs. You can see their names on the screen. All the details are on the website. I can tell you it's an excellent panel of experts on SAF, so they need no introduction, I'm going to say, to begin with. I'm just going to say a couple of brief words to frame. The panel session is, to quote the agenda, looking at the outcomes of CAF3, the challenges of production scale-up and feedstock availability over the coming years, and airline commitments to demand-side measures. So that's what I'm going to steer you through this morning. I wanted to start with three messages, very high-level messages to frame us on SAF. The first one is that SAF is really the key to taking the carbon out of flying by 2050. And just to underline that, on the screen you can see transition pathways published by ATAG, IATA, ICAO, ICCT, MPP, many acronyms, but that's effectively the global government through ICAO, a series of industry and indeed NGO and think tank roadmaps, SAF, anywhere up to 70% of the solution by 2050. So it's key. Second message, we can do it. And you'll hear later from today, Virgin talking about their 100%, landmark 100% transatlantic SAF flight last week. I was talking to Rolls earlier, all of whose engines are now able to fly on 100% SAF, Boeing targeting that by 2030 for all of their production aircraft, 100% SAF. Thirdly, then, the challenge really is taking action. And I like the focus at COP on taking action. I was seeing some of the posters today. Action inspires hope, belief, trust. The industry is taking action. 50%. Airlines representing 40% of global air traffic have committed to at least 5% SAF use, actually some up to 10 or even 30% by 2030. We need governments to take action to send the market signals to scale SAF alongside industry. Brilliant to see that 40 countries are discussing or implementing measures. And the CAF agreement we've already touched on, again, a landmark step with 5% reduction in carbon intensity by 2030, an important step forward. So that's just a bit of a framework for us. I'm going to open with a question for each of the panel. It's going to be in two parts, and I'm going to ask the panel to speak for no more than 2 minutes as the clock counts down, just to frame this. I know if I set it at 2 minutes, people won't go too far beyond that, he said, looking at the panel. The first two questions then, what are your views on the outcome of CAF3? Part one, and part two, if you had to pull out one challenge now for the scale up of SAF, what would it be and how would you address it? And I'll then look to theme a conversation around policy, feedstock and airline commitments as we go. I don't think we've got Slido for questions. I'll try, if at all possible, to weave in audience questions. So if you really want to engage or feedback, just the person who waves the most will basically get asked for a question, I think, is the process. I don't think there's a particular order to the panel, so I'm just going to swing along to begin with. So, what are your views on the outcome of CAF3? And if you had to pull out one challenge now for the scale-up of SAF, what would it be? And we're going to start with Munir, co-founder and director of SAF1. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I think we clearly welcome the outcome of the CAF3 announcement, 5% reduction intensity by 2030. We would have expected something a little bit higher, in line with some of the self-imposed targets that we've seen in Europe, for example, and other cargo airlines. I think we've seen the chart a bit earlier. So, but obviously very clear. And what's also been evident is that production is going to be required in every jurisdiction, really globally. So we know that 90% of oil and gas production is in 22 countries today. There's a great opportunity for SAF here to be really much more decentralized. And in terms of your second question, I mean, from my perspective, the key challenge, other than cost and obviously supply, is how do we get the world to move at the same pace in terms of meeting those targets. And again, going back to the decentralized approach, I think that's going to be key, and that's our strategy at SAF1, is to really go very local when it comes to SAF production, capturing local feedstock, stimulating a local economy, creating local jobs again, and again achieving energy security.
Bit of timekeeping. If we can pass the mic to Jen from Rolls-Royce.
Yeah, so from a Rolls-Royce perspective, we think the CAF3 outcome shows really good momentum, carrying on from the long-term aspirational goal. We're really pleased to see the 5% global average. Of course, we would love to have seen more. I think we always want more, right? But we really welcome the fact that it's accompanied with that global framework as well, to show how do we make sure that all the states can kind of progress as quickly as they can. So that support for the knowledge transfer, the technology transfer, we think is really important, along with that kind of 5% target. I think similar to other challenges, we've shown that the technology is not a barrier to the uptake of SAF. We can see that really it comes from the supply side for us in terms of scaling up that production. And we've also seen on the charts that there's lots of different feedstocks that we could use. So really what we'd like to see is support for some of the less mature feedstocks. So maybe some of the power to liquid, where actually we're going to need not just the kind of direct fuel, but it's that energy that you need to support it. So your low cost, low carbon electricity, that kind of thing, to really progress that scale up of SAF.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to start by thanking Haldane Dodd. I think about the last at least maybe 2 months, Haldane's work in Montreal leading up to the CAF3 conference, and I think he's been here for maybe 3.5 weeks straight. So Haldane, can we just give Haldane a thank you? I would say the outlook for me at Boeing, and I think the policy element is so important. I almost applaud the policy framework that came out of CAF3 as much as the quantitative target on emissions reduction. I think this idea of policy being the great unlock between aviation and finance and the energy industry is critical. And I think some of the things that we started to outline there about what good policy looks like if we really want to spur this industry forward now and build on the momentum were critical. I think the SAF accounting idea and how we form that so that it becomes trusted between fuel producers and fuel consumers is going to be critical. So that would be what I thought was just a great advance, a great global advance. SAF is the answer, and now we have to work the policy side of this and get the emission reduction, you know, that we're after. So that's what I would say. And I would say the challenge, and Miriam hit on it today, I think the challenge but the great opportunity is aviation and energy need to work together on this. And by energy, I mean small, dedicated, focused SAF companies and the large oil and gas companies. We're going to need it all, and we have to take advantage of mature infrastructure to get to these carbon-reducing fuels sooner.
Good morning. And my sincere thanks to Haldane and the entire ATAG team for pulling together what I believe is a very appropriate conversation in a forum at COP28 around the role of a hard-to-abate industry like aviation. So United, we're thrilled to be here today. We have long pledged our commitment to net zero by 2050 without relying on the use of carbon offsets, which is fundamentally rooted in the need for sustainable aviation fuels. And what we believe is the outcome of the CAF discussion just 2 weeks ago is really a declaration and almost a shift, or maybe an expanded aperture, I'll say, from recognizing in a global policy framework. We started with carbon credits, now we're moving to sustainable aviation fuel. The message is super clear to the market. We are shifting towards the adoption of lower carbon fuels, and that's the right solution within aviation. So it's really been fascinating to watch this evolution, and I do believe that the commitment made under ICAO is really sort of a double click into that theme of we are shifting, we are learning the science, we understand our industry, and we're focusing on reductions within the operations of aviation. If I were to identify what I think is the biggest challenge, it's clearly pace. We're not moving fast enough, and I think we've seen that from every presenter so far. For me, I believe that the single biggest challenge within that is the financing disconnect. We're seeing some desire to put dollars behind venture startups. We're seeing some 10 million gallon plants. United needs 4 billion gallons. We are a single operator. You can look worldwide to sort of determine how much fuel we're going to need on the course to net zero by 2050. There simply is not enough right now. And so that's part policy, that's part bringing capital to markets, that's really about shifting behaviors and driving the kind of change that we need in the schedule that we're committing to now by 2030, decade end.
Thank you. So being the last one is very difficult to be creative at this moment, but well, I agree with my colleagues here. Also, I want to thank the organizers ATAG and COP28, of course, for this invitation. So I represent the IAG group. I'm from Iberia. We were the first group of airlines to commit to the net zero emissions target in 2050 and also to the 10% target of SAF in 2030. So that sends a clear message that for us and for all the industry, of course, is critical to, as you said, I guess the word is pace, and we need to really keep this moving forward and being more ambitious as possible, because this is the key to the health and the existence of aviation. Cannot be other way than being sustainable. There's no other way, as everyone here agrees. So for us, the CAF is excellent, is a step moving forward. We need to everyone be involved in this from a national, regional, international level. So this is critical for the industry, and as a challenge as well, I think financing, price of SAF, and alliances, I would say. We need to get the governments, the incentives and the help to invest for the financing of the SAF, because it's too expensive at this point, and we really want to use as much SAF as possible, but needs to be more in quantity and a better price, of course.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a great framer for the discussion. So the three themes I suggested we focus on were around policy, feedstock and airline commitments. Let me just start with the policy piece, and maybe if I could start with a question to Lauren and to Chris, both from the US. So I think certainly speaking from a UK perspective, we have looked quite enviously at the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the tax breaks for sustainable fuel. We've certainly played that back into the UK debate to say, you know, look what's happening. America's attracting the investment. What I'd be interested in a couple of things. Firstly, your view on is it as rosy as we see it from the other side of the Atlantic? And what do you see as the kind of blend between carrots in terms of those incentives and sticks in terms of mandates? And I'll come to others on the panel on the same theme.
So thanks for the question. I think it's a really important one. I'm really quite thrilled with the leadership we've seen from the administration in the United States. They have sort of put the gauntlet down and said that the transition is happening in every sector in the United States, and aviation included. We are thrilled that we have this tax credit for sustainable aviation fuels. It's the first time we have an aviation tax credit to support our transition to low carbon flying. In addition to that, we have a broader clean fuels production credit that follows. Both of those credits, what I think is noteworthy and where I think the United States really got it right, is that it's performance focused, meaning you get more money the greater the reduction in the carbon emissions associated with your SAF pathway. Those are the kinds of indicators that we actually do need to bring to market, because we're not picking winners or losers of SAF types. We're actually focusing on the outcome and incentivizing the market to really continue to innovate and find those pathways that can achieve the greatest reductions in the most economical way. I will say one of the areas that we need some improvement, and we're very busy and heads down trying to facilitate this conversation with many of you in this room with the US government, is the duration and the amount. The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Credit is only a 2-year credit. We're halfway through that term. We don't have guidance. It's not implemented. It's kind of a nightmare. But we're working on extending that timeline so that we can have a longer signal to the market and the investor community to say, these credits are here to stay. They're bankable against some of the investments that you're looking to make, and we stand by it as a US government. And then hopefully the clean fuels production can kick in afterward. Before I turn it to Chris, I will also note that we have seen a tremendous amount of innovation come to market because of these incentives. United looked at some of these pathways, but 18, 24 months ago, they did not make sense. We could not make the numbers work. And so we sort of stood back and said, we're going to take a wait and see. Well, since then, we've launched an entire venture fund focused on SAF production alone with 13 other investors worldwide that have helped us really start looking at putting dollars towards some of these startup technologies, because with those incentives, the numbers do work. And we see a viable marketplace, and we really want to kickstart some of those technologies. And so I'll turn it over now to one of the investors in our fund, Boeing.
Thanks, Lauren. I guess I want to start where Annie mentioned this morning, the communication aspect of this. When we're in our aviation bubble, I think it's one thing, but when we're out engaging cross-sectorally, we have to talk a little bit differently when we engage feedstock providers or banks or energy companies. And I think one of the things I appreciated about the SAF Blenders tax credit was it sought to be technology and feedstock agnostic. And I think now what's happening as it gets driven into the tax code, that is the discussion of what kind of models are going to be used to calculate the life cycle carbon improvements so that these things qualify for the tax credits. It's not an easy issue. And the people that make ethanol, for example, want to be covered in the tax credits. And so this is where the policy gets hard, but the intent of trying to be agnostic on the technology pathways and the feedstock innovation that's occurring is very important. And I agree with Lauren. I worry a little that when we're out talking about SAF, everybody sort of thinks of it as this one thing. It's this one thing made out of, I heard chip fat or cooking oil the other day. It's this one thing, it's oils with the HEFA process. And the fact is there is tremendous innovation going on right now in feedstocks. I happen to visit with my alma mater, University of Illinois. It's an agricultural land-granted school. They're genetically re-engineering land cover crops that will require very little water and have higher lipid yield, all for the days where we're going to make cleaner fuels. So the innovation occurring in the space is fantastic, and I think we want to encourage that wherever we can.
Thank you, Chris.
From a European perspective, we are very happy with the 20 million allowances to cover the gap between the jet fuel and the SAF price. But we are worried that, or concerned that we will need more allowances really in the future. And also, we are kind of jealous with the IRA because we think that sends a stronger message. And in fact, the investment is going towards the US. And we conducted a study here in Spain about what, in numbers, what this new industry will represent in Spain in terms of social and territorial cohesion. And it was astonishing. It was incredible, and it's a great opportunity to have the producers stay local and create this new industry. So, sorry, we don't want the investment to go to the US. We want this to be everywhere, and in Spain too.
Thank you, Teresa. No, it's interesting. It's a kind of, it felt like the US started, if you had a spectrum from carrots to sticks, the US started very much with the carrot approach. Europe was more sticks through the mandate, but has started to introduce some more carrots through some of the allowances. But I think your point around this being an opportunity around the world for domestic production, energy security and jobs is absolutely right. Munir, just on that topic, you talked about decentralization. Was that interested in exploring that a bit more? Is that a nod to the role of national policies in particular in scaling this? Perhaps if you could talk about that. And then this point on, it's not just one feedstock, as Chris said, it's a whole variety.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, absolutely. I think just on the IRA, our perspective is clear. It's stimulated a lot of investment, especially on the technology side. But to Lauren's point, it has limitation. It's expiring in 27. If it's a change of administration in the US, what is the certainty? And us as investors in the space and developers, we want revenue certainty, right? Long-term revenue certainty. And I think this is where the government needs to play a role. So I think ideally we want to see the mandates, but we want to see also revenue certainty on the long term to be able to invest, because these are long duration assets, long payback time. And yeah, there will be different technologies, different level of capex. So we really need to do that. And then we need to see, frankly, the other big aviation hubs follow through as well. We need the Gulf, and we're hearing some mandates that might be coming up as well on the horizon. So that's very positive. We need China. We need Southeast Asia. Those are big aviation hubs, and they need to also be putting the right policies in place for again to be able to get to the production targets. I think I just want to end on the looking at, again, on the policy side. The IMF came up with some numbers on the fossil fuel subsidies that we have currently, and we're talking about $1.3 trillion of current subsidies that go into fossil fuel again. That is the amount of capex required to fund the entire SAF industry for the next few years. So again, we want to see those phase out. Again, moreover, I think this is the explicit subsidy, but if you factor in the implicit subsidies, the collateral damage that this has, we're talking about $5 to $10 trillion. So again, putting things into perspective, the money can follow if we just rechannel those resources accordingly.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jen, just on this whole question of feedstock and different production routes, are there views, technology considerations from roles in terms of the different production pathways for SAF, or are you largely agnostic, anything can work with your engines?
Yeah, so at the moment, obviously, anything can work in terms of the feedstocks. So with the drop in SAF, obviously, it meets that Jet A specification. The engine essentially can't tell the difference between whether it's been produced sustainably or whether it's conventional jet fuel. So from that perspective, we don't really have any concerns. We obviously want to make sure that any of the fuels that we do use meet that criteria that Corsia sets in terms of being truly sustainable. So when we look at things like the biofuels, we want to make sure that it doesn't compete with food crops, it doesn't compete with feed crops, water usage, all of that kind of thing. But we really see a place, and you can see it in the charts that we were shown earlier, that both biofuel and the synthetic fuel both have a part to play. Both will be needed to support aviation to be net zero by 2050. So we really do encourage all the pathways because we can't get all the fuel we need from one alone.
Which is a great lead into the next theme I was going to suggest we tackle, which was around feedstock, actually. So, and it would be great to get everyone's perspectives on this. So, obviously, lots of debate around the world in different countries on, is there sufficient sustainable biomass for aviation? Does aviation need to be prioritised? How quickly can we scale up power to liquids? So perhaps if we could do another swing along the panel on that point. So, is there enough sustainable biomass available globally, part one, and part two, how quickly can we scale alternatives like PTL, e-fuel, synthetics? Chris, can we turn to you next?
You know, I think a lot of the studies we've seen, whether it's through Clean Skies for Tomorrow or ICF's analyses or ATAG's analyses, suggest there will be enough feedstocks. It won't be all one pathway, and it may be geographically dependent. I think there's a lot of roadmaps. I know Australia recently released one with their national science agency, CSIRO. These road mapping ideas of what elements of the supply chain are available in a region. Is it feedstock? Is it renewable electricity? Is it green produced hydrogen? And by the way, renewable electricity and green produced hydrogen would make any SAF pathway cleaner, even before we get all the way over here to PTL. And I think PTL would be a great way to deal with this in the future, because that would mean we'd have an abundance of renewable electricity. I mean, think about it. If we had that much renewable electricity, that we could direct air carbon capture, we could green electrolyze hydrogen, and then we could add more renewable electricity to make a fuel. That would be a lot of renewable electricity. And those renewable electricities, as they come online, or the green hydrogen, would also help the other SAF pathways. So I don't think it's a matter of throwing out earlier feedstock solutions necessarily as we move towards PTL in some regions of the world, and I think we're going to need it all. And so we should encourage those different pathways and supply chains to take root wherever they can. And then I think we need that global accounting system that's trusted by producers and consumers.
Brilliant, thank you.
May I? So yes, I totally agree. We need all the technologies. We need all the feedstock. In a first moment, in this same study I just mentioned, there's a first moment in which, of course, all the residues from the waste from forest and oils, etc., agriculture will be needed. In Spain, we know that we not only will have enough for us, but we will be able to export these waste as well if we wanted, if this industry was created in Spain. But in a second moment, everything will move towards PTL, and it will make sense economically in the future. So it's a wonderful technology because you can even get negative emissions. So that's the future, and we should all aim at producing SAF with that.
Lauren, enough feedstock, role of PTL?
Well, you know, I think we're going to be fine. I mean, my goodness, we're going to be fine. There's a lot of drama about this, but what makes me an optimist, and my team's probably rolling their eyes right now because I tell this story all the time. We invested in this company called Cemvita, and this is just one example of what has potential to unlock over the next couple of years. This company is literally creating, they found this this bug, this microbe that eats CO2 and creates a high-yielding lipid. So if you think about, yes, this is like a Pac-Man that chomps on carbon, I don't know where Rohini is, and turns it into a high-yielding lipid. This hasn't come to market yet, but it's a way that we can actually open up the scale of fats, oils, and greases in a capacity that we have not yet unlocked yet. Of course, there's the next generation, which is really about biomass. In the United States, we've got a tremendous amount of ethanol that is under production and currently under production, and we've got a sector that is shifting away from that, so there's opportunity there. Couldn't agree more with the comments about power to liquid. We've got dependencies there about a robust, abundant power sector that is greened. So we look forward to the day that happens. But I do think that there's a lot of focus on the innovation to drive scalable and sustainable feedstocks. And that's really crucial, is that we make sure we have the criteria locked in, we have transparency around that, we can track all of the usage of that feedstock in a way that demonstrates that we're actually pulling down emissions in the industry.
Brilliant, thank you. Love the idea of a Pac-Man chomping on, I forgot, what was it chomping on? Carbon. Excellent. Very good. Jen, anything to add on feedstocks? You touched on this a bit.
Yeah, I think just to add that we've done quite a lot of work with the Cambridge Aviation Impact Accelerator, and that suggests that we can cover about 40 to 50% with biofuels. And then we've also done some work looking at kind of the hydrogen availability and how much low-cost, low-carbon electricity you need. And we're looking at sort of around, you need to increase your grid capacity by about 10% to support aviation, which is kind of in line with what a lot of the other groups like IEA and things kind of model. So we definitely think it's doable. I think to echo Lauren's point, definitely very optimistic that it's more than doable for us, and we're not going to compete with anything that we wouldn't want to compete with for that energy or for that fuel.
Brilliant. Munir.
Yeah, just, I think we've covered a lot here, but I think just to add a few comments on I mean, the studies we've seen is anywhere between 50 to 100% in terms of how much availability of biomass. I mean, we're at less than 1%, so we have a long way to go before we can start worrying about that. That's one. And then what we're seeing is the again, with the penetration of electric vehicles, we're seeing a shift of the biodiesel industry into HEFA, and that's again capacity that was not available a few years ago. That is going to become more and more available. So that's on HEFA, and again on the other promising pathways, whether we're pathway agnostic. So, and again, in order to scale up, we'll have to play in every pathway progressively as the technology readiness level of each pathway gets higher. On the municipal solid waste, for example, we're doing a lot of work there. There's 1 kilogram of waste per person on this planet. I mean, there's plenty of waste around. So again, as soon as we nail down the gasification technology, I think we're going to see a lot of activity there. On the power to liquid, that's an interesting one. I think very relevant for this part of the world is. It's going to be a real function of the cost and price of green hydrogen. I think with some of the lower cost of solar, I think UAE has now the lower levelized cost of energy when it comes to solar. I think there's obviously plenty of space. So that's going to be a very promising avenue for the UAE, and we're quite excited about that.
Brilliant. The piece on green electricity is fascinating. Just as a quick sidebar, we did, in our latest UK Aviation transition pathway published earlier this year, we looked at the total electricity requirements, some order of magnitude estimates for SAF, for hydrogen, for carbon capture, putting those together for PTL. And it was up to 20% of the UK's electricity requirements by 2050. And when I first saw that figure, it was an eye-opener. But actually, if you look at some of the work done by the Mission Possible platform, I think Faustine is speaking later, maybe here, they'd concluded up to 10% globally. And actually, the thought process I went through was, actually, isn't that quite a positive story that we know how to do green electricity. Yep, we absolutely need lots more of it, but look at some of the commitments emerging here. And if the unlock for aviation is fundamentally around green electricity, that is, well, let's take action and make it happen, as the COP focus says. Just before I go on to the last topic, any questions people in the audience want to ask? Any comments on what you've heard so far? Don't feel you need to, but I want to give the opportunity. We've got one in the front row. So I need to come with a microphone, that probably means, yes.
I can enunciate.
Very good, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Karina. I run an aviation circularity venture, but my question is actually on the financing need that you've all asked. So my background is in impact investing and blended finance deployment. I was invited here at COP to support the development of new supply chain decarbonization funding models. So I'm interested to hear from all of you, like, what's missing? Right? Like, I'm someone, I can bring whoever you need at that table. We can sell you all very, very well. What's missing? Why isn't financing at the table? How do you want to create that conversation?
So, Chris, you talked about Munir, go on.
No,
you talked about the finance as unlocked by policy as well. Munir, go.
As I said earlier, I think we are looking for revenue certainty, especially on the early technologies. So Mandates are important. Again, we need a global playing field as we again go into this decentralized approach of building maybe smaller scale HEFA plant to start with. That's the fastest way to get there, and we believe the most sustainable way. And that is a de-risk approach. The technology is ready. It's been proven. So you can. Those projects are already bankable, and those are already already billions of dollars that. On the demand side, airlines will buy anything that you can produce today, right? So that is already ready, and we just need the policies to be in place. On the other technologies, they will come later. Again, it's going to be a matter of time, but we will need also some support on, getting those technologies at the TRL level, which is bankable and financeable. So revenue certainty is key in my view.
I think I'd agree with the revenue certainty thing from a producer's point of view that favor a mandate. I think the key thing is if you're a CapEx provider, then you want some certainty on the duration of the project, and it depends on who you're working with. And I think one of our challenges is we have all these small innovators, but maybe they're not yet bankable credit. And so then it almost attracts venture funding, which has these high expectations of return in 5 to 7 years. It's not good for project finance. So I think that's where the policy, I keep thinking this policy unlock, that round table that has a bank, a fuel producer, an aviation provider, and a policymaker, and finding that policy that de-risks the CapEx flowing into these projects is really critical. And I think that's true whether you're a small focused startup or you're a big oil and gas provider.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the inertia we're seeing is not the initial funding. So venture, demonstration phase, even that's happening. It's getting to the $1 billion plan investment and taking it to commercialization. That's not happening. That's sort of the valley. But I will also say there's a disconnect that's happening with the financial markets around expectations of this bankability because, it's very unorthodox for an airline to sign up for a 20-year fixed term offtake agreement in any capacity for fuel. And there's sort of this desire by producers that are rightfully taking risk, but that's not how we purchase. And so we haven't yet found a common ground to navigate that desire for certainty on the one side from the investor and sort of the purchase behaviors of a traditional commercial operator. And I think once we sort of address that disconnect and find a way to make both parties satisfied in that equation, we'll see a lot more investment happening.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually, and I was pleased to hear your words, Munir, revenue certainty, which certainly with my UK hat on, we're focusing a lot with the government on precisely to help unlock investment, and that's such a clear message coming through from investors. And it's, good to hear it's a global message. Just building on, one more question, brilliant. Right, I'm going to do my microphone job, since I asked for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Dina Kamel. I'm a reporter from The National. We're a UAE-based newspaper. So I just wanted to take a moment to connect this room of esteemed experts from the aviation industry with some of the conversations that are happening outside this room at COP. So we're hearing a lot of calls and urgent call to action from climate envoys, climate activists who are asking for the aviation industry to be given an additional tax on their carbon emissions, to be held responsible for their emissions, while others are even saying the aviation industry has a responsibility to contribute to the loss and damage fund that's been newly created here at COP. Can I get some of your thoughts and commentary on what is the responsibility of the aviation industry within that context? And is that the right way to reduce carbon emissions, to incentivize better ways, greener ways of flying? Thank you.
Perhaps I can...
Go for it.
Well, it's a very difficult question. Do you hear me? Yes. So, but I understand. We have to understand and be mindful of everyone's opinions and perspectives. aviation represents around 2-3% of global total emissions, which doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility. And another thing, to be honest, is that aviation, even though it represents that small percentage, it's only around 10% of humanity flies. So it's a question, I guess, because sometimes I wonder why the focus into aviation so much, because there are so many other sectors that contribute as much or even much more. And I guess it's because of this problem of climate or that only this 10% of people that fly. So it's an equality in reality. But so people need to understand that aviation is critical as well for the well-being of many countries, even vulnerable ones that depend on tourism. So it's not just people that want to have fun that travel. It's a matter of well-being and important things. They create aviation creates jobs, create wealth, and so many good things. Even it's critical for humanitarian purposes. So we are the ones most interested in moving towards sustainability. We want SAF. This is why SAF is so critical to us, because it's moving from fossil fuels to another sustainable way of transportation. But we need help. This is not just us doing this effort. Well, I'll stop it there.
If I could just offer, I totally appreciate the intent of the question, because it's really about wanting to see progress right now. And frankly, if I was queen for a day, I think we should tax carbon. I think there should be some kind of price on carbon. I do. But that's not for me to decide. So now we're trying to figure out what are these other workarounds and how do we actually demonstrate that there's a cost to what we're putting into the environment. I think we are in a bit of a conundrum as a hard-to-abate industry, in that if you're looking for progress today, you are going to ask us to take on behaviors and decisions that really are fundamentally not in the best interest of the industry. And what I mean by that is the only way you can really show progress right now is by going out and buying carbon credits, which is fine. You can go buy carbon credits, but that doesn't make me, as a leader in the aviation industry, change my decisions, select alternatives, modify my behavior. I don't do anything differently. And that's not the behaviors that we're trying to really encourage within the industry. And so we are asking for an element of patience to say, let us build this marketplace, frankly, for a product that does not exist right now. Let us facilitate the start of a transition for aviation, and let us do this right. And that is fundamentally what we're all in this room trying to solve for today. And I do think that that has got to be the commitment that we lead with, because we don't want to have a temporary Band-Aid solution to this challenge. We really need a permanent fix by reducing the emissions within sector.
Great contribution. Thank you, Lauren. Just having thought we had loads of time, clearly we're now at 4 minutes, so we haven't got a huge amount of time to finish. But the final area that was in the plan for the session was just briefly looking at airline commitments to demand-side measures. So, Lauren, you were just talking about the challenge for airlines committing to long-term offtakes, given some of the costs. Just interested, what further actions can airlines take to stimulate demand? And within that, what's the kind of conversation you're having with your consumers, with travelers, either individually or with corporates? Is there an interest, even if it involves paying more? Can you kind of harness that to send a demand signal?
So I'll tell you, our customers have been really some of our most strategic partners in our transition so far. We have a program called EcoSkies Alliance, which is about 40 corporates right now. It continues to grow, that help us finance that premium. And as you all know, at least in the US, it's 2 to 4 times the cost. In Europe, it's different. Without their partnership, I'm not sure how much we would be able to afford the purchase of sustainable aviation fuel on our own, given how low margin we are as an industry. The other point that I'll also make is that this year, we introduced into our booking path the ability, both the emissions per flight, but then also the ability for the average consumer, the average traveler, to contribute to United Sustainable Flight Fund, so investing in the future of sustainable flight. It has been remarkable, given our history with carbon offsets and sort of the very low adoption that we saw historically there, moving towards, hey, invest in SAF. This is a new market. We need your help. Be a part of the change. Understand the solution that's the right solution for aviation. We've seen a tremendous engagement from our leisure travelers in wanting to participate. It's a low dollar sign, so it's anywhere from $1 to $7, so not a high contribution, but it's really about sort of bringing a movement forward, engaging our leisure travelers. My understanding, at least from watching sort of the behaviors of our consumers, is that they are far more sophisticated. Our messaging around sustainable aviation fuels is working, and they want to back the right solutions. And so I applaud everyone in this room because all of our collective efforts are starting to work on what is actually a very sort of sciencey and complicated message we're starting to penetrate. So kudos to everyone here.
Brilliant. And that's a great note to end on as we count down the last couple of minutes. We always like an on-time arrival at Heathrow. Good aviation joke to finish on there, so I will finish on time. Thank you to the panel. I think you've heard a great set of insights and action being taken across the value chain on sustainable aviation fuel. It's the key solution to take the carbon out of flying. We can absolutely do it, but collectively we have to take action. It's the first time I think I've heard the word greenium today, which I like, so I'm going to start using that. There is a green premium, but with the right policies as well as action by the industry, we can unlock the policy unlock, as you put it, Chris, and get finance in. So on that note, I'll close actually a minute early, which I know Haldane will thank me for. Thank you.
Very much appreciated, a minute early there. And thank you very much to all the panel, to Matt, to Lauren, to Teresa, Munir, Jen, and Chris as well. So earlier, Yassar spoke about some of the work that ICF had done exploring how we will meet our net zero goals through SAF. And if I can have the slides back up. Yes, these statistics here show the number of production facilities that will help to meet some of those global goals, and also show the number of jobs that could help be supported or created by the shift to sustainable aviation fuels. And these jobs can be in countries all over the world. So, to explore how we can ensure that no country is left behind in this transition, I'm now going to welcome Michael Rossell, who is Deputy Director General of ACI World, to moderate the next speed panel, which will explore the financing needs of SAF development, particularly the role of blended finance in assisting the developing world to kickstart SAF industries. So, Michael, I'll hand it over to you and your panelists.
Thank you very much, and I invite my panelists to join me on the stage. Very good, thank you. Let's count them up. Excellent, thank you. So, just sort of setting the scene a little bit on this, and I plan to have my panelists do the work and not me. And to note that the conversation that we had in the last panel was very much focused on the North America and the European scene. What we really want to do in this panel is to go a bit more into detail in what can happen around the rest of the world, and to recognize that at the conference on aviation and alternative fuels 2 weeks ago, the conclusion was very much one that the developing world needs to be part of the process. It was very clear that the target of 5% carbon intensity improvement applied globally. It recognized that some parts of the world will be able to move more quickly than others. But the message came across loud and clear that the developing world does not want to be simply a supplier of feedstock. The developing world wants to be part of the process. It wants to produce its own sustainable aviation fuels. So on the panel here today, and it is very much a speed panel, we have got representatives from the investment community, from the production community, and in particular, Francis from Kenya, who is very keen to be a first mover. So what we want to do at the end of this session is we want to sign a contract that is going to say this is how it's going to happen. So let's start off with the perspective from the investors, and Bertrand, to talk a little bit from the CDPQ perspective as to what it is that investors need. We've already talked about regulatory certainty, we've talked about the removal of risk. What are the specifics with respect to developing countries that you need to assess to be able to say, look, this is a good prospect, let's put money into this, and bearing in mind that this is not his own money, this is other people's money, and so there is a particular fiduciary duty to make sure that there is good custodianship of that investment. Bertrand.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So I represent CDPQ, a global investor, Quebec pension plan. We manage $420 billion and invest Canadian and invest across the world in infrastructure and all sorts of asset classes. I think I'd like to pick up on the previous panel, actually, and I thought it was very good because all the questions about finance were already answered. But there was one, the lady from United was sitting in this seat, I think, said, well, you know, it's unusual for us to commit to long-term contracts in the aviation fuel. It's unprecedented. Well, we're trying to do something unprecedented, and we do expect some assistance from the airlines, in particular, to start, somewhat unprecedented behavior, at least to prime the pump. But once we have the long-term demand contracts, I think we need regulatory certainty in the countries in which those plants are going to be. And I fully agree, and I've been on another panel the other day, with the fact that it would be completely silly to start transporting biomass in huge volumes across the world. The plants need to be where the feedstock is. And so for that to happen, we need a clear government strategy about SAF, which covers not only the questions of, well, building an industrial plant, but most importantly, where is the supply chain going to come from? Who is going to produce this stuff? Where? How is it going to be brought to the plant? And those can be quite complex issues. Permits, committed tax regime, and I'm not asking for tax breaks, but at least tax certainty going forward, which would apply to both the investment regime, but also the questions of importing capital equipment, etc. Well, I spoke about the feedstock supply. The other thing we need is a committed technical partner. We're financial types. We don't know how to build a SAF plant or run a supply chain, and so we would expect technical partners to do that. It was raised a little bit earlier also, the questions of all these new developments from green tech people. That, in our view, is going to make it difficult to deploy capital at scale because it is very risky. The type of investments we're talking about is billion-dollar investments, very easily reached, and we have actually already financed a SAF investment in the US that uses municipal garbage to turn into SAF. And that is a billion-dollar investment. We've made a small commitment to it. But the point is we need de-risk technologies, at least to begin with. Innovation is great, it will happen, but if we expect innovation in an innovative country, doing innovative, that's just too much for pension plans at least, and the type of capital that we're asking. So really tried and tested to begin with, and then, it's a small steps policy. Offtake agreement.
But Bertrand, can I just stop you at that point, and we'll come back to these issues, because I'd like to just pick up now on the development of plant. You raised this question about untried technology. I think that there's a lot of experience now is being developed in that. So let's just pick up on that, because the specific on this panel is how do we get this into developing countries? Yeah. So the question then is to Pat, is to, what are the perspectives and what are the challenges? And then we'll come to Francis about the regulatory environment there. Okay.
So whenever you look at these things, you just need to, there's a couple absolutely true things that must be. Got to have a sustainable feedstock that's readily available, can be collected. It's got to be economical. This is incredibly important. It's got to be done in ecosystem thinking, because the cheapest raw materials, believe it or not, are those that are grown, the things that are plant sugars, and then oils by far are the cheapest. But that means then you're going to pay attention to land and agriculture, and that means you're going to be involved with agriculture and production of protein. This is incredibly important, and this paradigm of it's food versus fuel is absolutely wrong. It's if you're going to grow something and use land, you better be producing protein, because that helps the local economy, especially in developing countries. It also helps it in developed countries. You have to have that perspective. Make the soil better. That is important first. And to put this in perspective in cost, the raw material, the economics, the cost of production, cash cost of production works like this. HEFA, carbohydrates to alcohols to jet, those are in the low cost category. The next level of cost structure is going to be Fischer-Tropsch. The next one is PTL, many, many dollars more per gallon in production cost. You know what that means? Anything soon is we're going to be growing something. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us to get it done right, document it well, pay attention to it throughout. The technologies that are getting commercialized first are HEFA, alcohol to jet from carbohydrates. You are automatically engaged in production of food products in those systems. Automatically, that's part and parcel to it. So we go to a country, Kenya, it would be working with your farmers and agriculture in improving your food, improving the production, improving that whole ecosystem. And to think it's not that, you're kidding yourself. You have to pay attention and work with it all. The actual technologies to convert the oils and fats, done. Alcohols into hydrocarbon, done. We've been doing it since 2011, done. We know how to do that. That's not the problem, it's the financing. And now the next part. So we have one part, feedstocks, how do you get them? Next part, technology, done. The next one, who is going to pay for this? These things cost more than Petrojet. Who is actually going to do it? Yeah, well, no, I'm actually buy the product, the airlines. They can't afford the premiums, so it relies on government subsidies and some stuff. Who's going to be, what policy is going to support that increase of cost? And this is where the IRA bill did a good job on the CI points, being paid for CI reduction and all the rest. Who will pay for it, really? And will it be stable enough to secure investment from colleagues like this? How?
So let's talk a little bit about the regulatory environment, particularly. We'll focus on Kenya. And perhaps, Francis, you could say a little bit about where your planning has got to and what you're looking for to make it actually happen.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very happy to be in this panel. First, for Kenya, why we are progressing this, we already did a feasibility study in 2018, which have already shown there is potential. So there is already feedstock which is being evacuated from Kenya, that is castor oil and also used cooking oil. There is water municipal waste and also water hyacinth. So what we need now is to have a robust policy, a policy that is supporting in terms of feedstock certification from the refinery, how it will be going to be set. And also the next step is in terms of financing, in terms of de-risking. We need to have corporate who are already signing agreement in terms of taking the fuel. We need also the airline to have airline who have already made commitment that it's not only the domestic or local airline which are going to take the SAF. And that when we have corporate taking that, we are going to de-risk. Now come to the government. We need to have proper regulatory framework that guarantee that there will be tax incentive that will help to reduce the cost of investment. And with that, we are able to promote in terms of SAF production. And now in terms of, to add on what he has said, we need to look SAF production in terms of the whole value chain, in terms of the whole transport sector. When we are saying transport, let's not only look the issue of aviation, let's also look the issue of ground transport, where that we can also produce SAF as we do produce issue of biodiesel, which will be used by road transport. And this now will lead us to have a proper study showing the economic benefit to the government in terms of GDP contribution, and also the issue of how the farmers are also going to benefit in the whole value chain, the transport, and with that, it will make it a good business case, especially for Africa. When you say you want to do SAF, you also look the other benefit, not only the whole price, the final price, but the benefit, what is left on the ground from the farmers and other investors. So we find there is a full value chain which is needed. And lastly, we need also to have involvement of academia, because that's where the issue is. You find there is no technical knowledge on the ground. So we need to have our local academia, university involved. And with that, now I add other 3 C's, because we had 3 C: corporate, coalition, communication. So we need now coalition and capacity building to be able to move forward. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Pat first, and then Bertrand. So Pat, do you have what you need now to go and build your plant in Kenya? And when you've heard the answer to that, Bertrand, are you ready to finance it?
No, we don't. It is simply because the security, it'd be about where do the feedstocks come from, how stable they'll be over the long run, what infrastructure exists for that to create those feedstocks, because you can't just poof them into existence. So there's work to be done there. So working in cooperation in Kenya, glad to. Learning how to set up the actual true data tracking from the ground and helping farmers with the data and then tracking it through, and then helping develop the energy infrastructure that's required. We need green energy, electricity, green gas. That's how you lower the footprint, make a more valuable, carbon negative SAF. That's going to be important. And then, of course, there's the whole education and all the rest. So would we do a project like that? We're interested in it. We're working in India with Praj, in partnership with India Oil and Praj, to make that happen. It's going all the way back to the farmers to help develop their economies. That thing can be done in Kenya too, but it takes partnerships to pull it together. And most importantly, someone better pay for the product at the end so people can put a project together and get it financed. And that's your cue.
Let me get my checkbook out. No, I would say, you look at our track record, our own track record. We have invested billions of dollars in green energy in India, in Brazil, in Mexico. So why not elsewhere? It depends on the structure. It depends on the de-risking mechanisms. There is also talk about blended finance, which could be helpful in certain countries to offset the risks that cannot be otherwise offset. So the ecosystem, I think the key aspect here is that we need to talk. Because we need to talk with governments, the questions of policy, we need to talk with the industrialists, we need to talk with the farmers, and then see, okay, well, those are the risks that are left. We need to talk with the airlines, we need commitments, and then see what risks are left and see how we can mitigate them. But the difficulty is not mitigating the risks. The difficulty is talking and creating the environment, the multi-stakeholder environment to actually get these things done.
Yeah. So this kind of echoes the comments from Annie Petsonk earlier on about the collaboration and communication. Is that I've got you three on the podium now. Everybody has got a will to take it forward, but each of you has got a sort of like a little bit of a logjam as to, how do we move from this goodwill, this commitment, to actual practice? And so, I mean, Francis, perhaps you could just say a bit more about what you as a government could do to provide the assurances that both the prospective investor is going to look for, and how can you provide the perspective to the fuel manufacturer to say, look, he has said to you, these are the things that I need to know before I can move forward. How can you provide that assurance?
Yeah, thank you. based on our workshop that we held on September this year, on September 11 and 12, one of the resolutions we said one of it is to have a coalition which has partnership, that we have steering group that involve both investors, the airline, and the government, because there we can be able to talk and be able to unlock all the difficult that we are able to. With that, now we are developing a SAF policy and roadmap which is already linked to the production, that we don't have the investor coming to produce without someone who is off-taking the SAF. So we need to have proper coalition and partnership that involve all stakeholders, from transportation, from airport, that you cannot do one thing alone. So you have to have all people involved in the stakeholder that you can be able to move forward. And also bring in the issue of having a financing model that is be able to de-risk in terms of we have government contribution, other form of financing also included to ensure that we reduce the risk. Because if you look, currently the rating of investment in developing countries is very high. It's about, the discount rate is that 7.5 compared to developed country, which is only 15. And then you compare the interest rate, we have 5%, where in the developing countries about 13%. So you find it make the whole investment more costly. And that's why we need to have offtake or agreement or blended finance, which will make it easier. So key word here is partnership and coalition involving all stakeholders. Thank you.
Just a quick comment, and we're running out of time as we always do. This question of offtake agreements was something that was raised by Lauren earlier. You don't demand an offtake agreement from a gas station. You just have people come up and fill their cars. So why do you need to have offtake agreements from airlines? Why can you not just assume, and that of course is projection and there's risk and all of that sort of stuff, but just assume that there are going to be aircraft coming to this country, they're going to refuel, so you know what the volume of traffic is going to be, you know what the volume of fuel is going to be, so why do you need specific offtake agreements from particular airlines?
So we're, of course, working on financing big plants, and the issue is we have to finance those plants to attract the equity and debt. You've got to have certainty of a return, at least so that the investor can say, oh, yes, it's reasonable, I'm willing to commit my investor's money into that. And you must have that. In order to do that, then you must know or have a picture of what your revenue and margins are over time, and that requires a long-term offtake agreement. That requires airlines to commit then to purchase the stuff. And of course, this is the tough issue because no one knows exactly what that value of carbon is in the long run, because that's actually what we're talking about. All of these products are going to be at a premium when oil's cheap like it is today. It's going to be at a premium to Petrojet. Yeah. Who is going to step up and say, I commit that many $1 billion off my balance sheet? Which airlines have a strong enough balance sheet to do that? That's a tough question in and of itself. So that's why the government is so important. Government policies and programs are so important to help get it started. Yeah. It will not occur otherwise, maybe with the exception of a couple airlines could step up and do that.
I think you have to look at what happened with renewables in the last 20, 30 years. There were long-term agreements to buy the power from governments or from state-owned utilities at a price that was above the odds. It launched the industry, and this is what we need to do. We need to prime the pump. They may not be needed, long-term agreements may not be needed in 10 years once it has become such cookie-cutter approach that it's de-risked. But at the beginning, we need that. And there was also a question about the cost. To me, if you say, okay, well, you blend 5% of SAF and achieve that goal, and that SAF, let's assume, is 50% more expensive than normal jet fuel, well, it's a cost increase of 2.5%, if I'm right. If my math is correct. Big deal.
Yeah.
It's doable.
So we have run out of time. This conversation needs to continue, but not on this stage. So thank you to my panelists. Thank you all for your attention. I think that this has been a very productive discussion, and let's keep it going. Thank you. Thank you all.
Michael, thank you very much for taking us through that and for the panel session as well. Yes, a speed panel. We've got a lot of speedy things on for the rest of the day here, but we wanted to give you a taste of what's happening across the aviation space. It's not all about SAF, so we're going to start moving on to some of the other things that aviation is working on, and I'm going to do something pretty controversial now and say we're not going to have a coffee break. Because we are running behind and we'd like to catch up as much as possible because we know that you all have other things to do after the meeting. But as I said at the start, please feel free to go out and get some coffee. These are all very informal events at COP. I'm going to welcome now Olivier Yankovic, who is Director General of ACI Europe, to make an announcement about the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program. So Olivier, please.
So good morning, everybody. I'm sorry you have to bear with me and not have a coffee break, but we'll try to keep it short. First of all, as ACI, we're obviously delighted to be part of this event. And at the end, I'd like to thank very much Haldane and all the team of ATAG for bringing us all together once more at this very critical juncture. What I'd like to do is brief you on how the airport industry specifically has been working on reducing its own carbon emissions as part of the wider aviation sector's climate action. So looking at where we currently stand in terms of our efforts and announcing today a new critical chapter in our work and those collective efforts towards net zero. So starting with carbon management at airports, it's been a long story actually, because we started working on reducing our emissions back in June 2009. That's when we launched airport carbon accreditation in Europe. At the time, nobody was talking about net zero. Rather, we were trying to provide our airports with a toolbox on how to reduce their CO2. And that's how we ended up setting the standard for carbon management at airports. How did we do that? Well, we didn't want to reinvent the rules, so we actually followed existing global standards and methodology from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the World Resources Institute, and in particular when it comes to defining the different scopes in terms of emissions that happen at an airport. That came together with 4 initial levels of certifications from airports, so from the very basics, how to do a carbon mapping, all the way to what we call the level 3+, which is the carbon neutrality level. That also came with independent management about the program, because as ACI, we didn't want to certify our own airports on carbon management, so we gave the management of that program to WSP. That came with institutional oversight, and we're very proud and happy to have in the advisory board of the program all the institutions you see here, in particular ICAO and the UNFCCC, and I'd like to thank them very much for their support. And that obviously came with transparency in the form of annual reporting about the program. I think overall what is very important is that this work has not remained static since 2009, in the sense that we have been evolving the program following science and societal developments, and that's obviously something we'll continue to do, reviewing the requirements under the program. That notably led us to tighten the requirements for offsetting. That also led us to, of course, embrace renewed ambitions when it comes to alignment with the Paris Agreement. We created new certification levels above the ones I've mentioned before, requiring airports to follow a carbon reduction pathway which is fully aligned with the Paris Agreement. I think what airport carbon accreditation clearly has done since 2009 is creating a global climate action community of airports, because what started as a European initiative became global by 2013, because we extended the program to all the regions of ACI across the globe. And as you can see here, we made significant progress in getting airports on board. In the first year, we had just 17 airports certified. We're now at 557 airports across the globe, across 5 continents certified. That's roughly at the moment 46% of global air traffic. But very importantly, I think this is a community that is delivering year after year tangible CO2 reductions. The latest count in our last reporting period is for a reduction of more than 1,150,000 tons of CO2, which is quite significant, and that keeps going on. The groundwork that airports are doing through the program, as of course, I need to take you through the different regions of the world so you can appreciate the number of airports that are certified. Each dots represent, of course, a program certified at the different levels of the program. So you can see massive participation in Europe, significant participation also in Asia Pacific and the Middle East, going to Latin America and the Caribbean, then North America and Africa. Building climate credentials and recognition has been, of course, one of the key reasons for us to do this. And I think the words that you can read here from the UNFCCC and ICAO speak for themselves. But beyond that recognition and the recognition that individual airports get through the program, I think very importantly, what we are doing is that we are moving from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. And of course, this is crucial because climate change is accelerating. And against that background, I think clearly what we see is that airport carbon accreditation is now increasingly about supporting the business transformation of airports towards a new airport value creation model based on sustainability, innovation, and diversification. Today is an important date for us because we are reaching a new milestone in our climate action efforts through the program. We're launching level 5, yet another new level of certification under the program. What this new level does and will do is that it will certify airports for achieving and maintaining net zero CO2 in scope 1 and 2 emissions. It will require airports to provide a management plan to certify that they can maintain that level moving forward. It will require airports to fully map all of their Scope 3 emissions and also to provide a roadmap and a stakeholder engagement plan with intermediate milestones on how to achieve net zero also for Scope 3 emissions. So quite an ambitious new level, which reflects the fact that indeed we're starting to see some airports reaching the net zero emissions for Scope 1 and 2. And today I'm really very proud and glad to announce that we're getting the first airport certified under the program. You can see them here. We have Amsterdam Schiphol, Eindhoven, and Rotterdam The Hague, managed by the Royal Schiphol Group. Christchurch in New Zealand. We have Madeira, Ponta Delgada and Beja in Portugal, together with Toulon Airport, all managed by the Vinci Airport Group, and Göteborg and Malmö, part of the Swedavia Airport Group, which is the Swedish airport group. So I'm really proud, and I think they deserve a round of applause. I will get them on stage, so hold on. We were supposed to have with us Conor Barry, who is responsible for stakeholder engagement at the UNFCCC, but he is being held into the blue zone, so he can't join us. But I'm very happy to invite on stage Sheikh Ayman Al Hosni, who is the president of ACI World and CEO of Oman Airports Company and a longtime supporter of our climate action as part of ACI. And I'd like to have Ayman help me give the certificates to the pioneers that I mentioned. So we'll start with Wilma van Dijk, CEO of Rotterdam The Hague Airport for the Royal Schiphol Group. Please, Wilma, join us on stage. We need to make some space. I'm calling now calling Claire Waghorn, Sustainability Transition Leader at Christchurch Airport. Please, Claire, join us, and congratulations. Nicolas Notbar, CEO and President of Vancy Airports. And finally, Fredrik Jaresvel, Director of Strategy and Innovation at Swedavia Swedish Airports for Gothenburg and Malmö. Thank you for your patience with the little ceremony. I'll pass by the mic to Alden. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Olivier, and congratulations to those airports. The start, hopefully, of more and more in that area of airport carbon accreditation. Next, I'd like to turn to our next panel, which is on infrastructure and operations, following on the airport theme. This will be led by Nancy Young, Chief Sustainability Officer of GEVO and a longtime friend of ATAG. The panel will explore how technology and better operational thinking can play a role in reducing fuel use from the existing fleet. No, that's another panel, but this one's on operations.
Surprise! No, I hope my panelists will come up here right away, please. Join me on the stage. And also, I see 20 minutes on the clock, and we were supposed to have 22, and I'm going to count on those extra 2 minutes. So come on up. So thank you. Thank you, Haldane. So, no, delighted to be here, and thank you all for joining us. So I had the pleasure back in 2007 in being in the Air Transport Action Group kind of brainstorm session called the Edge of the Box. And there we were like, what the heck are we going to do to get to what we really need to do in carbon and climate? And in that, we said it really takes an ecosystem, right? You have already heard that today and hopefully everywhere. You can't do it alone. And in that, it was everybody in the supply chain, everybody involved in aviation has to work together, and they all have their part to play. You heard earlier today that SAF will be and is going to be the biggest element of meeting these grand and important critical goals for climate. But every piece of the puzzle is critical as well. And I have the pleasure today of moving us on in the dialogue to that infrastructure and operations side of the picture. Really the important role that airports play, and we got a good preview there in the last announcements, and really that aerospace innovators play in making this real. So I'm going to take these guys through a speed panel. I'm going to briefly introduce them without bios, and then we're going to start asking questions. So first, to my left, we've got Sven Deckers, Director of Strategic Planning at Dubai Airports. Second, we have Fredrik Jaresvad, Director of Strategy and Innovation, Swedavia, and he just got an award, you heard. Third, Amal Osman, Managing Director, Middle East and North Africa, Collins Aerospace. And last but not least, Jane Boyle, Head of Sustainability at Abu Dhabi Airports. So let's kick off. So in this panel, as we said, we're going to probe technology, operations, infrastructure, and how they play into aviation decarbonization. And as I was noting, Olivier gave us a very good kickoff talking about airport carbon accreditation. So kind of building on that, from your experience, what are some of the operational efficiency measures being deployed at airports to reduce emissions, and how are these efforts getting integrated across the airport community? I'm going to start off with Sven.
Sure. Thank you very much, Nancy. So I think when it comes to the overall topic of environmental sustainability, there's one statistic I have in mind, and it's not the statistic mentioned earlier this morning, which is we're about 1.92% of global carbon footprint. The statistic I have in mind is in 2050 will be 22 to 25% of share of global footprint. And this is, for me, this is what has to guide us. As you know, we're one of the 9 hard-to-abate industries. Many industries have other solutions, and we don't have all the solutions today. So as we heard this morning, so obviously ingredients such as SAF, solar, electrification of ground fleet, retrofit, they're all important ingredients, but with that, we're not going to get there. We know that. So what we do at Dubai Airports, and I'm sure other airports very similarly, we have a list of hundreds of activities, which are all kind of small, minor operational improvements, but they all kind of contribute to the end goal. And with these hundreds of activities, there's hundreds of partnerships. So at the airport, with also the other global companies. And I think just the ones that are for us, I think, really important are, for example, Follow the Greens, which is really trying to save taxi time on ground, because at TXP you have 380s, 777s, and 1 minute of taxi time. If you can reduce that on average, those are huge savings, yeah, compared to retrofit of lights and so on. So we really want to approach it from kind of data-driven and see what are kind of the biggest bangs for the buck we get.
No, excellent start. And I'm going to jump all the way down to the end there to Jane to give her thoughts on this.
Hi, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, so obviously, as an airport, we've got so many stakeholders, you know, so many different operations going on at once, and I think what this creates is so many opportunities. So we're incredibly fortunate in Abu Dhabi, where we have just finished developing a strategy with our aviation cluster partners. So we're working with Etihad Airways and the ground handler as well. And what that has actually done is kind of brought us together in terms of having common goals. Obviously, within an airport, you know, collaboration is the key, regardless of whether we're looking at the local kind of community and environment on the ground or in the air. So as part of our strategy, we've actually developed, it's more than kind of 25 different initiatives and projects that we can all work on together. It's around obviously reducing energy, reducing emissions and similar. And again, similar to Spain, we're looking at trying to build as many partnerships in the community as possible. For us, one of the big focuses is developing a circular economy. And the reason we've selected this as one of our key themes, obviously with the opening of our new terminal building, Terminal A, we have a unique opportunity where we can kind of wipe the slate clean and start again. As part of this, we're mapping out all of our waste streams and finding partners to go along with each one. So it's similar to a kind of matchmaking service, except for waste products. And we're actually transforming it from an operational burden into a potential revenue stream, which also could, you know, potentially feed into, we're looking at biodiesel and maybe in the future SAF as well.
No, excellent. So we're an array of measures, lots of collaboration, data really homing in. Frederick, could you share with us your thoughts?
Well, yes. First of all, I think we, as airport operators, we need to do our homework first in order to facilitate a fossil-free environment. We have done that within the Swedavia Group and turned fossil-free in our own operations in 2020. By doing a very structured work, inventory of where the carbon emissions come from. And it's kind of easy to do that because it's heating, cooling of buildings, also the vehicles at the airport. All of those stuff, I think most airports already have a grip on. Now, the next step is to work together with the whole ecosystem, as you said. And to be able to do that, you need to share data. So I totally agree with what you've already said. We have launched a program within Swedavia. I know a lot of other airports are doing the same. We call it TAM. It's Total Airport Management, where we're harvesting all the data that we can get and also trying to distribute it to our stakeholders at the airport. Because if you have an efficient airport, you also have the prerequisites to have a fossil-free airport, and also to reduce the emissions used at ground level, so to say. Yes.
Well, Amal, so we've got an aerospace innovator. What do you have to bring to this dialogue about the airport efficiency and decarbonization?
I think these were all really great segues. So Collins Aerospace is the leading solution supplier that helps enable many of these efficiencies that we discussed. So exploiting data is essentially one of the things that we can do to realize a lot of these efficiency gains. So looking at solutions like FlightAware under Collins Aerospace, you help with not only optimizing your flight paths, but using real-time data to help with the taxiing and efficiency gained within the airport operations. Another thing that also comes to mind is transitioning into more of a cloud-based infrastructure. This way you can actually start to realize a lot of those energy savings that many of the airports are aspiring to do that, and we have that through the Collins AWS. And we've noticed that many of the airports that have transitioned into cloud-based infrastructure, they've gained significant, notable and tangible savings from an energy infrastructure perspective.
Well, that's a really good kickoff, actually, and now I get this great opportunity to have us drill down in our speed panel as much as you can in the speed. So I'm going to ask a question of each of you, all kind of homing in on some of these key points. And I'm going to start with Frederick. You know, and actually, we've all been to airports, right? So we know where we go to our gate, and we know where we buy our things and all of this. But what we're doing is peeling back and seeing things that are way behind the scenes. And so Swedavia is participating in the EU's Single European Sky Air Traffic Management Research, CESAR 3 joint undertaking. Yes. A lot of words there. But why, and that's air traffic management, right? So why is air traffic management and its digital transformation important to Swedavia?
Yeah, you can wonder why Swedavia is participating in a huge program within the EU that is focused mainly on the airspace. But actually, what you see is when you solve the bottlenecks in the airspace, the bottlenecks move to the airports. So we need to cooperate with all stakeholders, air traffic management services, ground handlers, and so forth, in order to get a good operation, an efficient operation. Now, Swedavia, we actually participated in this huge EU project or program, actually, CESAR, since the get-go. First of all, we had small parts, and then eventually it's been bigger and bigger. What we have especially participated in is to facilitate the possibility of curved approaches into our airports, and especially Stockholm Arlanda Airport. Now, at first, this was not due to climate care. It was actually a noise abatement procedures that was the main driver for us to participate in those types of projects. But as the projects went along, we could also see that by introducing curved approaches into these airports, we could actually reduce the trajectories for the aircrafts into the airports as well, thereby reducing fuel consumption. And reducing fuel consumption, I mean, that's good not only for the airlines because they save a lot of money, but it's also very good for the environment. So that's a win-win situation. I think that's the approach you should always take when you're working on how to reduce your carbon emissions. You should look and see both in all measures when it comes to sustainability, both environmental, economical, and also social parts of it. And that's an excellent example, I think, what you can do in order to reduce emissions, working together with the whole network, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Totally enabling, not just the airport itself, but really within your own ecosystem and beyond, right? So Amal, let's pick up on that. I mean, the work that Collins does, you've got an array of technologies. What types of technologies are you advancing to help airlines operations reach targets of like 5 to 10% near-term operational efficiency?
Absolutely. It's never a dull day at Collins. So I will say, definitely touching back on the utilization of data. We have something called the connected ecosystem, which not only connects the aircraft, the airlines, and the ground operations, but we look at how do we make this the most efficient experience for all of our stakeholders. So we do have solutions such as the trajectory-based operations, which looks at how do we get an aircraft from point A to point B in the most efficient and the most fastest way possible, and learning from that, leveraging our historical data. But also from an aircraft and an airline perspective, we are incorporating a lot of autonomous innovations that help alleviate a lot of the pilot fatigue, but it also provides an opportunity to have a collective collaboration with looking at the data, connecting all of the ecosystem to make smarter and more sustainable decisions. So bringing everybody together in this ecosystem is where we thrive.
Excellent. And it really is almost, it's a baton pass, but it's not. It's a very integrated system. So Jane, you all just had a big opening of your new iconic Terminal A, and you have a huge system. How did sustainability and decarbonization play into that development, and how do you keep that going and expand it?
So obviously that was like a really major element within our new Terminal A. It had been certified to ESTDAMA, which is the Abu Dhabi Green Building Regulations, to 3 perils. So I think it's like one of the biggest green building certified buildings in the world. So it was a really major part of the design ethos, and something that we're really keen to do is to ensure that that continues in the operational stage of the building. So even though the building only kind of became 100% operational on the 15th of December, we already have an energy management strategy for the building. Looking at, it's a lot to do with the kind of major systems in the building, but then how can we use technology in order to assist us? Obviously, everyone's been talking about data and what a key part data plays. And I think within an airport, we have like so much data that we can use. So we've actually been doing quite a lot of work with our data team to find out what are those like specific KPIs and metrics that as an airport can actually assist us in achieving our sustainability goals. So we're looking at everything from like AI, machine learning, we've got this smart building. How do we maximize it? How do we make it really work for us? And for anyone that's visited the terminal building, you'll see it's this aesthetically beautiful building, but as with many airport terminals, they're not often, designed specifically with energy efficiency in mind. The fact that we're in the Middle East as well, obviously there's a huge cooling load on the building. So we need to become really creative. What can we do in order to make it as efficient as possible using the tools we have? And I think it's an amazing opportunity. Everyone's on board. And hopefully, I think within the first 12 months of operating, we should have managed to make, I would say, significant leaps forward in terms of energy efficiency.
It sounds like sort of an everything, everywhere, all at once challenge
Pretty
that you
much.
have, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, let's do a little drill down too with Sven. I mean, you guys are on the hot seat a little bit. The Dubai International Airport, main gateway for COP28, and a number of other high-profile global events with a sustainability focus, really. So what role does the airport play in serving sort of as a sustainability gateway ambassador for this?
Yeah. As you said, everything all at once. That was easy. But I think, yeah, indeed, as the largest international airport in the world, we don't just want to announce a net zero target, see what we can do, and just stop it up with offsets. We want to go beyond that, and the reason is very simple, because we can't do it alone. Even as such a big airport as we run, we know we have to work together. And I think the one positive around environment sustainability, if you look at competition. As airports, we love to compete on guest experience, on attracting passengers, attracting the best talent, being a cost leader. But when it comes to this topic, the only competition is really against time. All of us we're all of us in a race against the clock, as I can see here below also. And that's why, we see those are all to be an extremely active participant in these global think tanks, such as, for example, Airports of Tomorrow for World Economic Forum. ATAG has a lot of initiatives, so we really want to kind of bring our voice, bring our data, bring the transparency, so we can bring airports together, we can bring scientists together, to kind of jointly learn and implement what is there. So that's really how we see our role on that level, but also on the level of even the smallest concessionaires at DXB. We run workshops with them to see how we segregate waste, how we can improve there. So it's, as you said, everything all at once.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of us think of the airports as sort of a monolithic building that we go to, a necessary gateway, but there's so much more interconnectivity and global action, even by what an individual airport or airport suite. Recognizing that we're forced to be a speed panel, and we could have talked for all day, and we will, happily do that later if you'd like. But just a quick closing question to each of you. I mean, here we are, COP28. You've got negotiators here, other stakeholders, all keenly interested in solving the climate problem. So if you have your sort of 30 to 45 second answer, what is the type of message you would like to leave them with your experience coming from your role? And I'm just going to go down the line directly, so we'll start with Sven.
Keep your eyes open. Very simple. I think if you look at the graphs that were shown this morning, these are all projections, trajectories with what we know today. But if you look around on the expo side here over the past few days and next few days, just look at the amount of innovation that we see, and that's all thanks, I think, to globally the R&D funds that have been made available for this. So I'm very confident new technologies that we don't know today will come on the market. And what it gives me also a lot of confidence is when I go to dinner parties and cocktail parties these days, the number of private equity investors that are roaming around and spotting that gives me also confidence, because with new technologies, again, we know pricing points will continue to come down, and a lot of people are willing to invest, I think also thanks to mandates. We know the race is on, and it seems like most of these actors who are there for the solution are coming together, not only at panels, but also at cocktail parties.
Thank you. Well, Frederick, your last shot.
Okay. Well, first of all, we need to believe that this is possible, and it is possible to do this. And within the aviation business, we already have a lot of the answers of how to do it. Now we just need to do it step by step. And also we need to trust that new technology will come into matter as well. When we set out our goal in 2010 to be fossil free by 2020, we didn't know exactly how to do it. But we did have a vision and a target, and we worked it, and we did it in a structured manner. And I think that's how you solve these types of problems as well.
Amal?
To keep this succinct, since we're over time.
I don't think we're over time. Okay. I think they took our 2 minutes.
Okay, great. So essentially, really taking advantage of the existing technologies on how we can exploit data that's out there to improve our efficiencies is certainly an area. But as this team and as the world's here currently, looking at and advocating for harmonization of our air traffic management policies, as you see the growth in passengers, as you see the growth in airports, we have a unique opportunity on harmonizing on such a bedrock of an area where we can affect change, and putting a lot of those digital solutions and digital infrastructures in place. Aligning on those will start to materialize not only the short-term improvements that we've seen, but a longer-term and a more sustainable view of how we look at airports in the future.
Right on. Jane?
So I think it looks like we've run out of time now, so I'll keep mine really short. Yeah, so I think just echoing what everyone else has said, it's all about collaborating, working together, also being accountable as well, whether that's from data, which is something we're really focusing on, improving our data, building a strong foundation, but then actually being transparent about it, sharing it with our stakeholders so then they get input as well. So just, I guess, making everyone aware this is a part you have to play and having like a really clear pathway to get there. And it's amazing coming to something like COP28. I've been to one COP before, which was COP26, and it was like a fraction of the size of this. You know, obviously, it's really exciting to see so many people interested and so many people on board as well.
Yeah, no, thank you all. And it's really, as I said at the beginning, an ecosystem. I think you saw that, but it's a very active and innovative ecosystem. So please help me thank the panelists for their great contribution.
Thank you very much to the panel, to Nancy as well. Next up, we're going to shift into technology, and Rohini Sengupta from United Airlines, the Director of Decarbonization, is joining to lead this quick discussion as well with her two panelists. Maybe just one. Oh no, we have two.
Yeah, I was going to say, if my panelists could please join me. Everyone, thank you. As Haldane said, Rohini Sengupta, Decarbonization Director at United Airlines. And at United, as with the industry, we have our net zero goal by 2050. As was touched on earlier, as Nancy said, we've got a basket of measures where we're looking to reduce the fuel we use, right? So we've talked about markets that are nascent, that need to be developed, but this is an area where the industry is actually has a history of leadership, of innovating, of making more efficient aircraft and aircraft operations for customers like me. So joining me on the panel today, I've got representatives from our original equipment manufacturers, our OEMs, Roger Martella, Chief Sustainability Officer at GE, as well as Stefan Albert, the ICAO Executive Liaison and SAF Lead at Pratt & Whitney. And so in the interest of efficiency and technology efficiency, I will say Roger has to head off to another engagement quite soon. So if I could hand it over to you to begin, Roger, before you have to depart, really sort of what are some of the exciting developments you're seeing, particularly in technology investment, advancements, innovation, to increase efficiency in air travel today?
Well, Rohini, thank you very much, and Stefan, thank you for accommodating me. I'll have to go here in just a few minutes, and hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of GE. And Rohini, I want to pick up on something you said in your opening remarks, which is kind of how united this sector is towards net zero and the role of technology. Everyone has the same ambition, and where does technology come into play in realizing that ambition? And you know, I've been here for a week now, and because GE is such a diverse company, I've been interacting with all kinds of people all over the place on many different topics. And one of the things I think is very differentiator for the aviation sector is exactly what you were talking about, that of everyone I've spoken to, of everywhere I've been, everybody's debating everything, which is good. But I've always believed, and I think COP28 reinforces that this sector is the most united, the most together when it comes to the net zero ambition, whether you're an OEM, whether you're a customer, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a supplier of infrastructure, this sector is a united front. And I think that's serving us very well together, and we all have different ways in terms of how we can contribute that solution to get to net zero. So our role is to be the innovator of the technology. This is some of the world's most complicated technology, as you know well, and there's only a few companies, I think 2 of them are up here, that are in a position to help innovate the technology the world needs to help everyone else realize these net zero ambitions. So the way we think about it, I mean, let's talk about sustainable aviation fuel for a second. We're big proponents of SAF. We're huge cheerleaders for SAF. Our engines have run on SAF since like 2006. We've done 100% SAF flights, including on Emirates. And so SAF, we know, is a critical component, and we're going to accommodate all of our customers, all of our airlines, in making sure we can get our engines to 100% SAF so they're ready for you. But we also think we have to do more. We think we owe it to you to do more. We don't want to just leave you with that option. We want to give you as many options as possible. So we have a program called CFM Rise. And what this is a commitment to bring in a diverse range of technologies and innovation, things that we're not currently doing today, but we want to be doing in the future, so that we can achieve an additional 20% reduction in fuel and a 20% reduction in emissions. So what that does is enables you to use SAF, but it also helps you get further depending on how you want to go with it. And the CFM Rise program has a number of different technologies that are part of the equation. Some of them you can see, and some of them are kind of more behind the scenes. The one that's most interesting to me is the ones you can see, and this particular is our open fan technology, where we're innovating a lot for an engine technology that will literally have open fans, and the theory there and what we're showing is you reduce the drag, you reduce the weight, and I'm excited when that day comes. When I go to the airport, I come up and I see an airplane waiting outside for me with the open fans outside, and we're really excited, we're really ambitious about that, and the opportunities there. So that's some of the technology you can see. But just as important is what happens behind the scenes. So things like compact core, hydrogen fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, hybrid electric engines, and looking at a full suite of how we can continue to innovate to get to that 20%, to give you that optionality beyond sustainable aviation fuel. We all know, and you know better than I do, the long-term life cycle of products in this industry, the need to focus on safety, the need to solve for the laws of physics. So none of this happens fast. But you just can't start in 2030 to introduce a technology in 2031. So what's super exciting to me is what we're doing in the labs today in anticipation of the next generation of technology. We're not waiting, we're doing this now. So we have 1,000 people working on the CFM Rise program. They've produced 100 parts from paper to parts, and now we're taking those parts, integrating them into subsystems, starting to integrate them into systems. We're learning some things, we're doing some things right, we're making mistakes, and that's just as important because that's what enables us to get to these 2030 goals and so on and beyond. So I'll just end, first of all, thank you for the accommodation on the time here. I really appreciate it. I'll just end with where I started. We know COP28 is historic, but I think it's a historic moment for this sector because while everyone's debating, and debating is good, I want to be clear, I'm part of those debates, I love the debates. This sector is different because it's such a unified front, and to have these discussions, we know where we want to go. We don't have to debate that, and the question is how do we get there? I think that's a real differentiator and something that we can all be really proud of, and we're proud of the role that we play in working with everyone here to be part of that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for joining us today. Let's thank Roger as he heads off to his next engagement. And like I said, it's an exercise in efficiency in real time here. So, Stefan, a true fireside chat here. Stefan, same question. What is exciting to you, particularly in the world of aerospace technology, of aircraft technology, and the efficiency improvements yet to be made in the sector, particularly through technology?
So first of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to be at this COP28. I think also I want to extend the thank to not only Haldane, I know he's going to get a lot of thank yous, but for not just a month, for the last years of his dedication to making sure that we as a community come together. And I can't reinstate the fact that getting 190 plus countries to agree is the most difficult part. And again, Haldane and the team, I don't think I could achieve that. Now, let's take a step back. We're going to talk about SAF a lot, but we have to look, we talk about technology here. What is aerospace technology? The first one, efficiency. Efficiency, efficiency. At our core, for 60 plus years, since the jet age, and I'm reusing Boeing CSO titles, we're 84 to 86% reduction. More than cars, more than buses. So it's very important to keep in mind that we as an industry, it was cost related before, but it benefited the environment. So we have to still give ourselves credit that as a industry, safe, reliable, cost effective, and at the same time that we've reduced our footprint. The problem is that we're in an 80-20 rule. I have to say that it was 20% of the work to do 80% of the reduction, and the last 20% is going to be the 80% problem. Because we've made engines that are very efficient today. I'm Pratt and Pratt Candos, I represent both divisions. 94,000 engines year after year are in operation. Right? So you have to keep in mind that when I look at efficiency, I look at it from the single engine helicopter to the twin aisle. So I have to have technology steps in each of the different market segments. Technology, so where are we today? I'm going to really focus on SAF, but give you an idea of the 5 pillars that our industry as a whole, and Haldane had really well identified in different documents from ATAG. Efficiency, SAF, 100% electric aviation, which is still challenging in the larger aircraft, but it's going to take a space into the market. Hybrid electric battery, hydrogen, and then fuel cells. So we have these different pillars. And the problem that we have today is that we have to invest and focus in every one of those pillars. And I think, earlier, I think the key message is we have to keep all of these options open. We know that hydrogen is going to be a very big challenge in the future to carry on the airplane. There's less to burn it. We can actually do hydrogen burn today in our engines. So I think the bigger question now is where the ecosystem will be and where will it actually be distributable and flyable. So that's one other part. So hydrogen will play a very important role. Not sure it's going to be on the flying side. It may be on the support to the SAF industry. So that's still a debate. So we talked 100% electric. Very difficult with the density of the batteries today to fly a very large aircraft on electric. Not improbable, but with the battery density, we're going to have to see step changes in that type of transformation. Before I forget, I do have to talk about efficiency, again, at our DNA core. And what you're seeing, RISE is a clear example, GTF is another example. These are generational engines. You don't get every year 1% or 2%. You squeeze maybe 1% or 2% through the whole efficiency drive, but then you have these generational engines that come in and do a 20% or 15% reduction. They cost a lot of money. There's R&D required in order to achieve a propulsion system. It's not anymore just an engine, it's the whole system itself. It's quite complex. So when we look at what's exciting today, definitely the excitement is all of those are happening at different speed, at different segments of the market. We as a propulsion company have focused on efficiency SAF and some hybrid electric in the short term, and then research programs to support hydrogen. I think fuel cells are going to be a little bit more of a challenge, and that's going to take a little bit longer before we get to that next phase. Never been certified, so we have to look at it from the EASA perspective, FAA. They have to certify all these new technologies. So their challenge, they didn't have 150 new employees to do all the new technologies. They're running on about the same type of employees before, and they have to shift between the normal engine certification and the new technologies, which is another issue. So, did you want to skip to your other question? Because I've been talking too quickly.
Well, maybe we'll do a final one, because I think you touched on something very interesting, right? There are step changes to be made in efficiency gains through the generational development that happens in new models as they come out. I'm buying a lot of aircraft today. Thank you. And I see Mark over here as well, so thank you. So with our aircraft order, I mean, these aircraft, these engines will be in service for quite some time. So what advancements, what technology research, what are sort of the methods to increase efficiency, to fly more efficiently, to reduce fuel usage with assets that we're buying now that will be in our fleet in 10, 15, 20 years from now?
So I think we're Raytheon today, or RTX, right? So basically we are a merge of United Technologies and Collins. Amal was here earlier. Collins plays an important role in the operation, air traffic management, putting the aircraft on a diet, basically making the aircraft lighter, more efficient. So we have two sides of the business, the ones that work on the operation and the aircraft, and us, the propulsion. So the nice thing is that we are now in one company and we're able to cooperate at the Raytheon level now, or the RTX level. Hybrid electric, it's our combustor turbine machine with a Collins motor. So we're starting to connect these dots together. It's going to take a while. 165,000 employees, large corporation, is going to take a period of time before we integrate all these technologies into brand new solutions. I think what's more important, 94,000 engines. It's a cog, right? It's a big wheel that turns, and engines come into service, come out of service. problem that we have is we have very dependable engines. So dependable that they will last 45 to 50 years. We're one of the cleanest industry, by the way. We're not the cars where you throw away the cars every 10 years. These things last for a very long time, airplanes and the engines and the rest of the systems. So the biggest challenge is, when are you going to be able to insert? When do they become in the fleet? When do they come out to be replaced by the newer efficient aircraft? So from a propulsion standpoint, the biggest challenge today is maybe policy. You know, in Europe, they're talking about, could they put tax incentives or benefits to switch airplane in the current fleet model to 18 years instead of 26 years? So could there be incentive to actually retire an airplane before its normal midlife upgrade, we call it, and be able to maybe divert it to another market and then be able to use that airplane quicker, that new generation of airplane? So I think it's a mix of the process, the procedure, how quickly customers want to green. The technology is there, but it's not, again, we're not going to see generational leaps. And I have 46 seconds. SAF, 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 SAF. We have to be honest as an industry in all the reports, and I think it's clear, sustainable aviation fuel, whatever pathways, all the 7, the 9, the 10, whatever it is, we need volume at an affordable price and to be able to deploy this. You know, the Middle East here, key to this whole solution. We really need to see leadership, because that's going to be where we want to have here the oil majors to come in and support the innovators as Gevo, Neste, and Environt and World Energy, because that's going to be part of the whole ecosystem requirement.
Well, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think that concludes our discussion on efficiency through technology. I think there's a lot of promise, really, in the advancements in the industry, and particularly the leadership that's shown to date to help us achieve our goals. Thank you.
Well done on time. Excellent. Thank you, Rohini, and to Stefan as well for that. We're going to take, so Stefan's last point was about SAF. We're going to jump to a very exciting report on what happened last week with 100% SAF. And so I'm going to ask Luke Irvine, the Head of Sustainability for Virgin Atlantic, to come up and tell us all about that flight and what went into it.
Thank you. So, last Tuesday, a date that will be etched on my memory for a long time, we, Virgin, flew a Boeing 787. It took off from London. It flew across the Atlantic and landed in JFK. And it was done so powered by 100% SAF on 2 Trent 100 Rolls-Royce engines. And before I kind of give you a bit more insight into what it took to deliver that mission, there's a short video which hopefully someone will play for you, which you will see Richard and Shai Weiss, our CEO, talking to. So if someone could play the video, that would be appreciated.
Well, today Flight 100 is flying from London to New York on sustainable fuel, and that's a first and very exciting.
We really wanted to show that it's safe to fly a commercial flight across the Atlantic on 100% sustainable aviation fuel, and we're going to share, by the way, all these learnings with the entire industry in the UK and the world. So a great day for aviation in general, showing that there is a pathway to decarbonizing long-haul aviation.
First of all, we're going to implement a sustainable aviation fuel mandate, so airlines have to use at least 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030, and we're using some taxpayers' money with private investment to get 5 SAF plants, commercial scale, under construction by 2025, so we've got a domestic industry to produce this fuel.
It's an exciting dam, and it hopefully will be the start of a future where people will be able to fly in future years on planes that are not emitting carbon. But there's still a long way to go, but this is a way of just showing that it can be done.
Virgin 100, clear for takeoff. Thanks for your well wishes. Both engines are running on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. We're ready to go.
Amazing, brilliant. a fantastic day. There's an awful lot of people in this room actually that were part of that journey or helped in some way. And I think for me, you know, Flight 100, whilst it was a Virgin-led kind of collaboration with partners like Boeing here, Rolls-Royce, we had others like Rocky Mountain Institute, ICF, who are also in the room somewhere. I saw them earlier present. We had universities helping us do some of the research and development, so Sheffield University, Imperial College London. An awful lot of collaborators really helped to deliver this flight. And actually, far beyond that, we had Virant helping us with the fuel, we had Air BP helping us with fuel, and also the logistics. And it really was, I think, a great day for the aviation industry, because it shows that, you know, there are no technical barriers to 100% SAF. It is about the scalability of SAF in general, getting money into that system and really making sure we can deliver the volume. So it was an amazing day. What I would probably want to talk you through a bit is how we kind of created the SAF that we used on the day. So we actually took a combination of two different types of SAF. We had a 88% heifer mix with 12% of what we call synthetic aromatic kerosene. So the heifer, as you all know, produces the paraffinic kind of qualities that we need from a jet fuel. The SAK that was produced by Virant really adds the density and also the aromatic components that we need to make sure that the engine runs really efficiently. So we did a lot of kind of testing on that fuel to begin with, and what we kind of looked at was trying to reproduce a SAF that really is exactly the same as a traditional kind of petro-based jet. We kind of looked at that fuel and understood that, you know, whilst it has exactly the same qualities, it's not so kind of similar in terms of the approvals process. So approvals really was the key part to all of this. We ran that fuel through engines, we ran it through our APUs, and we really took the time with our Boeing engineers, with our Rolls engineers, and with our VA engineers to really understand where the risks were within using that fuel and to start to mitigate those risks. So much so that when we put in our submission to the CAA for a permit to fly, which was again a really collaborative process, we were able to quite quickly understand that really there is no reason why we can't use this fuel as a complete drop-in solution to replace jet. I think, you know, the approvals process is really, really key. But apart from the approvals process, we also looked at other things that surround the flight. So we've heard a lot about things like efficiency. I think, put in place about 18 different types of fuel efficiencies within kind of the ground support piece, but also the flight ops piece, targeting a 4% reduction in the actual fuel burn for the flight. It really is kind of a bit of a weird thing to say that it was only 4%, but actually only 4% across a whole year, an entire year, really does build up quite quickly. So much so that for us, you know, when you think about a 4% kind of saving for every flight across our kind of JFK London route, that kind of totals about 19,000 tonnes of CO2 per year. So it's those small efficiencies that can really help us kind of glean big savings. So ground and flight efficiencies were really kind of key to actually delivering a fuel-efficient flight as well. And we really put around all of that a robust life cycle analysis, measuring every single component of what it took to deliver this flight. So not just the flight itself, not just the ground-based fuel efficiencies, but also how passengers got to the airport, for instance, what food we were serving on board, and we really counted the carbon of all of those things to come up with a complete life cycle analysis of what it takes to deliver a flight. Obviously, fuel is a big saving, but, you know, like I say, it's those small things as well that we really need to think about. I like the idea of a kind of a carbon diet and making sure that the plane is really as efficient as possible. What we're going to do with all this information is really kind of in the next few months synthesize it, make sure that we are counting it and really putting it out for the industry to learn from. I'm very conscious that I've only got 30 seconds left, but I think March time we'll actually take all of that data, we'll present it to industry. Hopefully industry will take a lot of learnings from that, and actually we'll be able to move forward on making 100% SAF a more commonplace thing. What I would say is when we started this, we wanted to prove that SAF was a drop-in solution. I think where we've now got to is actually that call to action that we've heard so many times today about it being really about getting the money in, getting the investment in, scaling the industry, so actually 100% SAF can be a very common future for us all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Luke. I missed out on being on the flight. I was over here, but I hear it was a bit of fun on board as well as actually achieving some really interesting and important steps for the industry. So. Next up, we have a discussion not on sustainable aviation fuel, but another type of energy that we're looking into as well, and that is on hydrogen, the role that hydrogen could play from a technology perspective, but not only from the technology side, but also from the airport side and the system side as well. So I'm going to ask Ayman Al-Hosni, who is the CEO of Oman Airports, to lead this discussion with his panel. Thank you. Thanks. I'll give you that. Someone just forgot his Oh, yes.
Thank you, Eldon, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here among you. It looks like we have a full house, so I would like to bring the panelists on the stage, please. Welcome. And before that, I would like to thank ATAG for this amazing setup. Thank you very much. I think, all the papers that we're hearing since morning till now are really interesting and very good. Myself, Ayman Al-Hosni, I'm the CEO of Oman Airports. We operate and manage 7 airports in Oman. I'm also been elected as the chair of ACI World for 2 years, ending by end of this year. And I would like to introduce the panel. Both of them are amazing speakers. I took their biography and saw lots of panels you've already participated in, and looking forward for that. Mark is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs in Airbus, and Claire is the Sustainability Transition Leader in Christchurch International Airport. Welcome again. Before I give you the floor, I just will give you some insights on what ACI have done so far. We have actually collaborated with the World Economic Forum with the Airport of Tomorrow to make the airports more sustainable and energy savers. And there are many other initiatives that ACI World is doing along with the other regions of ACI DGs. For Oman part, the government have actually signed a $20 billion US worth of projects for the next 20 years. And they're actually looking at producing 500 tons of green hydrogen in the next 5 years. I think being ranked as top 10 green hydrogen exporters by 2030, and time goes on. So hopefully, we can see those kind of initiatives on the ground, and with having COP28 and this great show of speakers, leaders of the world to actually accelerate those initiatives. I'll turn to you, Claire, and I saw that you've done lots of good initiatives in Christchurch, so floor is yours.
Thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. I think a lot of people would wonder what's a little airport like Christchurch doing in a space like this. I think for us, it's about the ability to create a proven test case where a small airport relative to all of you big players but we have a very easy and accessible regulatory environment in New Zealand. We have unencumbered airspace. We have a 85% renewable electricity grid already. So we have every advantage and feel like it's so important that we start leaning into the decarbonisation responsibility for aviation beyond an airport's operational emissions, but leaning into those much more difficult airline emissions and what we can do to reduce those. And the New Zealand opportunity really relies very strongly on green hydrogen for our domestic transition. Our national carrier in New Zealand has one of the largest ATR fleets in the world, and it's very well placed for transition to domestic green liquid hydrogen. And so airports as critical infrastructure for refuelling, it requires us to actually start scaling now. I mean, we're very much looking forward to Airbus's planes, but we feel we need to be working on the energy infrastructure to have that fuel ready for when these planes come. And it's actually not that far away when you start working back and thinking about what is required from our energy generation side, the transmission and distribution grid upgrades required. I mean, to give you a sense of scale, green hydrogen for domestic aviation would require 15% of New Zealand's national grid in terms of the electricity to displace jet fuel for domestic flights. For us, that's 6.7 terawatts per annum to create 100,000 tonnes of green hydrogen, liquid hydrogen. So, yeah, we really feel like we need to start now. That's why, as an airport, we're here. We're talking about energy and infrastructure master planning. We're talking about collaborating across supply chains, as has been a common theme so far, and including the regulatory framework. So one piece that I'm particularly proud of is this document here. You can access it on the internet, h2aviationconsortium.co.nz, and it's a piece that we've done with our friends at Airbus. And it unpacks the supply chain and the different pieces of the puzzle that you need to work through with, for us, it's Airbus in New Zealand, Christchurch Airport, Fabrum, which they create hydrogen electrolysis and cryogenically cooled hydrogen liquefaction units, as well as Fortescue Future Industries, they're a big player in Australia, and Hiringa Energy, which are a hydrogen refueling station. So it's about how do we scale up the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Before we go to Mark, I just wanted to mention about a very big project that actually just been launched yesterday by His Highness Mohammed bin Rashid. It's like, I think, phase 5 or phase 6 on the solar projects. So well done to Dubai, and I really would like to give them applause. Thank you. Mark, you've done a lot or Airbus have done a lot in hydrogen, and we'd like to hear from you, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. It looks like we are not so many on stage when speaking about hydrogen, but we can see with you first and with you then that hydrogen will absolutely be a key part of the decarbonization of the economy. And so we have to look at this. First, I would say that, of course, Airbus is supporting the ATAG roadmap. I then went very quickly through it, but if you remember this morning, by the way, there are 3 scenarios in the Waypoint 2050, and as Airbus, we are a great supporter of the 3rd scenario, T5 technology. Why? Because if you look at the IPCC reports, you will see that technology is still the best way to reduce emission of aviation. And we have seen in the previous panel that this is really very efficient because, of course, when you have a very efficient aircraft, you reduce emission and you give more also efficiency to flying. And so we are really dedicated to that. Last generation aircraft is already reducing emission by 20-25%, and we are already preparing the next generation of aircraft. More efficiency means also less need for SAF or reducing the premium cost of SAF. So for us, technology and fuel are going together. This is true for SAF, and of course it's even more the reality for hydrogen. So as we are at the, not the end of this meeting, but close to the end, and we need to be a little bit interactive, I will start with a quiz. So, first, what is the proportion of hydrogen molecule in the universe? The proportion of hydrogen molecule in the universe. 85%. Yes, so let's say 92% or something like that of our universe is made of hydrogen. And of course, on Earth, you can find it in water, in methane, and so on. Second quiz question, how powerful is the hydrogen? For the same weight, how much, what is the multiplication factor compared to jet fuel? 3.2 to 3 times 6. Oh, we have specialists. So let's say it's... applause, please. But this is the engine manufacturer. So
is Airbus giving any awards for those answers?
We'll do. So three times more powerful for the same weight that jet fuel today. So you can understand why we are so interested in working on hydrogen. Let's question what is the LCA of hydrogen. Life cycle, you know, it's 100% CO2 emission reduction because there is no CO2 emission coming from hydrogen. And it's not only zero emission, net zero emission, it's zero emission. So we have to look at hydrogen, obviously. Now, of course, this is a very interesting challenge, and the question is where we are on that in Airbus. So, you know, our objective is to introduce the first commercial aircraft in 2035. We are still exploring two ways, what we call H2 burn, so burning hydrogen, which is something we can do. We have seen that engine manufacturers are looking at it. Second option, fuel cells. So both are pros and cons. Perhaps H2 burn is closer to what we are doing now, but fuel cell is perhaps even better for environment, from air pollution, perhaps contrails and so on. So we are still engaged and we are increasing the resources. Airbus is investing 3 billion a year in sustainability, and we dedicate a large part of it to develop this hydrogen aircraft. So fuel cells or H2 burn, we will make tests on both solutions, flying on the 380 with one or the other solution, and made a decision in the coming years, so between 2025 and 2030, to decide on the launch of the aircraft that would fly in 2035.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a fruit of thought. And I don't want an answer for that because I don't have gifts like them. But how old are you all? No answer. Just remember this, okay? I want to take you somewhere. Today, like for example, we at ACI World, we made a decision that we will go to carbon net zero by 2050. What are we doing from now till then? What are the phases? Are we going to get, and I don't want to sound negative, but are we going to get to 2050 and we say like, oops, what did we do? That's one question. The second question, we're making a decision where all of us here, I want to speak on behalf of all of you, all of us will not be in our jobs by 2050. So we're making a decision for others to take care of later on, okay? So now, I think what we need to do is to make some milestones, and I've discussed this in ACI, among all other airports. Like, we need to do milestones. We don't want to say like 2050. We need to say like, what are we achieving till 2025 and then to 2030. And so you need to have phases. I mean, I've always asked this question, what comes first, chicken or egg? You know, is the aircraft manufacturers should do the investment? What does the airport do? What does the airline do? What does the engine manufacturer do? So all of us need to work together, sing the same song, and dance the same dance. Now, we have 2 minutes left. 1 minute for you to wrap up, and another minute for Mark, because the gentleman there is just looking at his watch.
Thank you. And I think that's a critical point around we can't wait. Actually, there are things we can do now, and it's a really important question to be asking, what can we do now? Even if you aren't entirely on the green hydrogen bandwagon yet, I think there are things that are known right now, and that is, irrespectively, the energy generation required to displace jet fuel is massive. So a thing we can do right now that we're doing at Christchurch Airport is building a 170 megawatt solar farm. Whether that goes towards green hydrogen to fuel our Airbus planes, which is what our plan is, or whether others would direct that towards synthetic SAF. You know that you need the extra electricity capacity required. And I think it's also a really interesting piece, which I wanted to quickly plug. This is a future revenue stream for airports that we've never had accessible to us before. When you're thinking about what is the future of aviation, future of airports, we've never been able to generate jet fuel. So I think that's quite compelling.
Thank you. Mark?
Yes, I think we had this morning from the US representative a very clear message. We have to work on the system. And so working together, as you said, as Airbus, speaking about hydrogen, and our colleagues here from Christchurch, we think we want to create with the airport hydrogen hubs for ground transport first and then move to aviation. And so that this global system through energy, production of green electricity, SAF, because of course H2 is also a very important part of all SAFs, and hydrogen, work together with engine manufacturers to deliver. And of course we will do step by step, checking at each step that we are progressing, and we have a fantastic journey ahead of us, working together. And of course, unity of the system, working together is key. And by the way, this is what ATAG is doing every day, uniting us.
So you're going to work Airbus and Boeing together?
On many topics.
Okay, good. Well done. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. For those who have answered the questions, you can come to Boeing, to Airbus, to take your gifts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayman, Claire, and Mark for that as well. I think it's fairly clear that whatever way we use it, hydrogen is going to be part of our future in aviation as well as other parts of the economy as well. So we need to be part of that global hydrogen strategy in whatever way it goes. So for our final part of the day, I'm very pleased to introduce Kevin Welsh, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for Airlines for America, and will lead a panel that is going to cover a whole range of different topics to do with decarbonization. We've heard about the various different levers to get to reducing CO2 emissions, but around that, there are other questions as well. And so Kevin's going to lead us through those questions.
All right, thank you very much, Haldane. Great to be the last panel up here, and looking forward to a great discussion. So, what I wanted to do to start this panel a little bit was maybe just to follow up. We had that question about taxation, and that could be a touchy question, but I think actually really important. And this whole question of the aviation sector and this discussion we're having here, and how does it connect up with the COP negotiations? And I think it's really important, the panel that we're going to talk about, the big picture on decarbonization, really linking that up. It's easy to score some cheap political points, frankly, to come to this when there's a question about raising funding to point to the aviation industry. That's always easy. That happened about a decade ago with the Green Climate Fund. It wasn't really productive. But the real hard part is actually focusing on the aviation sector and working to reduce emissions from the sector. And I think the point's been made here earlier about the important role that aviation has in growing the economy around the world, in emerging economies and developing countries, and actually connecting those countries and helping them develop. And so that's critical, while at the same time focusing on decarbonization. So I think really the message here that's totally connected to the COP28 is what the aviation sector is doing to address decarbonization. And it's not about sort of an easy political point of putting a new tax on, but actually what we're doing and the hard work we're doing to reduce emissions from this really important sector. So that was one. I wanted to start with that. And then two, I think, what was nice about the presentation from Virgin was that chart that showed all of the pieces that go into it, right? It's not just about SAF, it's not just about more efficient operations, but airlines are looking at kind of the whole system on how we make it more efficient. So I think that's how we're going to kick this panel off, and I'm going to first turn to Rob Miller to kick us off and talk a little bit about the work that he's doing at the University of Cambridge and the Whittle Lab, thinking about whole systems and how we can tackle decarbonization with that approach. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So at Cambridge, we're leading a sort of international group of over 100 experts called the Aviation Impact Accelerator. Includes universities like MIT, Melbourne, Rolls, Boeing, lots of companies involved. And we're trying to develop tools which will assist people in accelerating change. The complexity of the whole system we've talked about, from the resources through the production of fuels to the actual passenger journey, and then the climate impact, and the way sectors interact with neighbouring sectors are of first order importance when you're making these decisions. And actually in March, we were MIT and Cambridge held a joint workshop over in Boston where we got policymakers together from the US, UK and Europe, and we used the tool, a bit like a minority report, to explore live the potential solutions. And there were some exciting solutions that came from that. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about those today. We took those back to Cambridge, and King Charles was really interested, and he has a real belief in the aviation sector, and he chose to make it the first event post-coronation to come to the Whittle Lab to bring together industry around those goals. Before I just briefly tell you those 4 goals we've come up with, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the nature of the model, because you'll see a lot of pathways and roadmaps are very smooth between now and 2050. And that's not how technology transitions go. And when you start to play with the model, as it gets more complex and realistic, you see tipping points within the model. You see bifurcations. You see particular actions that you can take at early dates that change your trajectory into the future. And so what we're doing in the model, these 4 goals, they're not trajectories all the way out to 2050. They are 4 actions that you can take up to before 2030 to change the future trajectory through the model. So I'll just briefly tell you what they are. So the first goal is to ensure that SAFs are delivered in a truly sustainable way. We've seen today it's very important we rapidly scale up SAFs. But what you find in the model is if you haven't got enough green hydrogen in the 2040s and you start stealing it off other sectors, the consequence on those sectors you have to bookkeep. And there are many sort of similar interactions through this process. So it's important by 2030 we have global policy in place that drives the right SAF transition in terms of its overall climate and nature solutions. The second goal is to drive a new business model in aviation. So aviation's been doing really well, as you've heard. 1 to 1.5% reduction in fuel burn per passenger kilometre per year. But that, to keep it going and to accelerate it, you can see at a whole systems level, by changing demand, operations, fleet renewal, you can accelerate that fact. And the model shows that if you can put the right incentives in place to change the business model of aviation by 2030, that this will drive demand and fleet management and operations, and you can get a 40% reduction in fuel burn by 2040. So the amount of fuel we could drive faster down that curve. So the third goal is to accelerate the demonstration of key technologies and infrastructure required to develop long-haul hydrogen aircraft. There's a real misconception in hydrogen. If you put the hydrogen, it's very light, but you put it together with the weight of the tanks that hold it at -253 C, and the weight is still about half that of jet fuel. So its advantage gets bigger with range. But we need to demonstrate those technologies, and to do that, we need to set up moonshot-style programs which would demonstrate several of these technologies and infrastructure by 2030. If you do that, you can really bring forward hydrogen, but you have to make that decision by 2030. And then finally, the goal would be to remove the cloud formed by aviation. So we know that 1 in 30 flights is producing a contrail. That's trapping heat in, warming the planet. The size of that 1 in 30 aircraft effect in warming the planet, we think, is the same as the other 30 aircraft's CO2 over 100 years. That's a huge effect. Now, the uncertainty on that's large, but the goal would be to trial and then deploy a contrail mitigation system that could start operating by 2030. So if I'm leaving you with one thing, it's think at a systems level. There are these bifurcations and tipping points that we must target early if we're going to tip the program. Don't think this is a smooth transition. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And I think that ties back into some points that Annie Petzonk made this morning. And also, what you're doing is really fascinating because it doesn't shy away from the complexity, right? But also needs to do so in a way that is digestible and understandable so that we can actually make choices to decarbonize the aviation sector. So really, thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Conrad next. And I think, from an aviation sector perspective, one of the things that I think, and hopefully you'll kind of help us understand this, that the climate goals and decarbonization have become sort of integral to the success of the aviation sector. And as IATA, representing around 300 airlines around the world, we'd be interested in your perspective on that, Conrad.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin. And Rob, what a fantastic future, and we are part of the Accelerator project as well. And we totally support this kind of work because it's the sort of innovation that we need to drive the industry forward. We're committed, of course, and we were one of the first industries to commit to net zero by 2050, and we remain very much committed to that. We've had our struggles through COVID. The last 3 years, we've had losses as an industry. I'm very pleased to say that as of 2023, we're back into profitability as an industry globally. Now, one of the challenges with CAF3 was that there's a huge differential between different regions in the world. And I think one of the earlier speakers spoke about the difference between maybe the developed world and the developing world. And so one of the struggles that we had as a membership organization was to try to close the gap between our members from the developed world and the members from the developing world. One of the things that is very clear to all of us is the essential part that SAF has to play in delivering that 2050 target, and particularly moving towards advanced SAF, as you saw from one of the earlier presentations. And so we're totally committed to driving SAF through as fast as we possibly can. One of the challenges for SAF, of course, is that it costs money. And then who is going to pay for that transition? And I think it's incumbent on all of us to work together to try to make that transition as fast and as smooth as possible, and to find all of the innovations that we can to make that innovation happen as fast as possible. One of the techniques that we would really buy into in a big way are national state roadmaps. We've heard about roadmaps from the UAE that sound extremely encouraging. We've had a lot of other roadmaps in Europe, in America, of course. We've got roadmaps work by Airbus and by MIT in Latin America. Roadmaps are tremendously important because they enable a government to look at the whole of the industry and also talk about other areas of activity, economic activity for a state, and then decide what the priorities should be, and then implement those things. So for SAF, we think it's very important now to get into implementation. We've got CORSIA, which kicks off from January of 2024, and we need to start putting in place national carbon credits to facilitate that transition. We also think that SAF accounting, we were very pleased to see that included into the CAF3 declaration, because it's very important to have a trusted SAF accounting engine and framework to be able to make this happen. So SAF's very important, but as Rob said, hydrogen, carbon capture, electrification are also extremely important. And as an industry, we're committed to being part of these simulations, part of these accelerators to make this transition even faster than 2050. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the things that I think is really nice about the panel we have to close out today is the different perspectives we're bringing. And again, I go back to the opening remarks. It's interesting how our opening panelists today pulled on some of the themes. So for the next question, I'm going to turn to Rob Johnston from the International Transport Workers Federation. And so, we're really eager to hear kind of your perspective, thinking from kind of the workers and a just transition. And ITF is an advocate for sustainable transportation and decarbonization, but importantly doing so through a worker-led just transition. So really hoping that you can tell us more about what that means from your organization's perspective and how that plays an important part in the aviation sector's goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, there's a lot to say in a very short space of time, but I'd also like to thank Haldane for the engagement we've had in ICAO and for today's event as well. I think the first thing to say is, from our perspective, there are a number of shared desires that we have. First of all, we understand that we need an industry which is profitable, investable, and sustainable, and we're on the same page with that. In order to achieve those three goals, we also believe that we need to do the following things. One, there needs to be multi-dimensional policies developed which actually bring the confidence into the industry to enable those things. And then, as you mentioned, linked to that is also the question around worker and just transition. We've heard a lot today about the different types of technologies that are coming on stream. We've heard also about the different possibilities. But of course, in all of those discussions, there's always the human element and the skills and the people that work in the industry in the future and their ability to adapt to the new skills that are needed in order to be able to retrain and in order to be able to attract new talents into the industry as well, and also to tackle pre-existing inequalities that have been in the industry previously and where progress has been made. So all of those are also very important elements for us to consider. And we believe that workers, of course, will play a key role into that transition. Most of our members, our unions and workers which are in the industry are fiercely proud to work in this industry, and many of them have worked in the industry for a long time. We'd like to see more young people in the industry, and we have to make the case that this is an industry that has a bright future and part of this process. I think one of the concerns around the just transition question, and also for the industry, the competitiveness and fragmentation in aviation to some degree has held it back a little bit from the conversations that we're having in maritime and elsewhere. And I think one of the real challenges for us as well, particularly when we're talking to governments and listening to a lot of the ministries that are here around, many of them are focused on the short-term challenge, which normally coincides with an electoral cycle around charging points in cities and that type of thing, because it's a quick fix for them to be able to address that. It's easily explainable. Aviation is much more complicated. You have to take a much more longer-term view, and we really need to get the attention and go and be able to get the focus we need to provide that confidence, not just for the future workforce, not just for the investment in skills and that just transition. So those conversations which map out, transformation mapping, what do we have today, what do we have tomorrow? And if you look at a licensed engineer today, we maybe will need 5 different types of licensed engineer in the future to deal with each different type of fuel. So that type of collaboration and coordination will only come when we understand the full picture and we have the confidence to move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Such a critical perspective here. Next, we're going to bring in another airport perspective. And I'm going to ask Veronica Pamio from Aeroporto di Roma to talk a bit about what you're doing there at the airport, but also, I think importantly, the work you're doing within Italy with the recent sort of pact for decarbonization for the transport sector. Really interested in your perspective and what you can share with us.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for being here, and thanks, Kevin. First of all, I'll skip all that's already been said about the airports and how can they decarbonize, and we've seen by ACI Europe this new initiative which is called ACA 5. So I'll skip directly to what we're doing to engage together with the oil industry. We had this intuition some 2 years ago when we saw for example, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the subsidies that were requested in the EU, that the oil industry should work together in order to ensure that any policy defined at EU level or at Italian level should be science-based and really achievable. So that's what we did. We thought we could try to do, and put together the oil industry. We tried, we succeeded in it. So we had all industrial partners, aviation, of course, companies, airports, association, and NGOs, institution working together in this alliance, which is an Italian alliance of the oil sector. I said extended to other industrial partners, so energy producers and providers, in order to define what we can propose to stakeholders. So it's really an advocacy initiative, Italian-wise, and we're trying to do our best to put all these companies and organizations, which could also be in competition one to another, together in a place where we can define at least top-level policy to be proposed. And so we started in 2022. It's almost 2 years, but we've already had 2 annual congresses in Italy, a presentation at EU level to the Parliament and to the Commission, and yesterday we presented this initiative here at COP. And I can say that we decided to organize ourselves in 3 working groups that meet constantly throughout the year. One is on airports, so how airports can work together with the oil industry towards the 2030 and 2050 targets. Another one on airplanes, and of course it's about technology, so SAF, e-fuels, hydrogen, electric. And we know that over there we struggle a lot to find an overall position that can be approved by all of us. But for sure we know that we have to work on short-term and then medium and long-term target that we can agree on. And a third one, which is on intermodality, which is key, of course, for decarbonization, at least on the airport side, and also looking at the air multimodality, and we're also working on advanced air mobility. And a fourth one, which has just been created, it's on energy. So this is something that has been, let's say, copied in other member states in Europe, and we're happy about it because as long as we work all together, we are sure that we can find solutions to be presented that then stakeholders will define, mainly at EU level, because I understand that what has been US have been doing with subsidies. It's much easier to work on, while all the targets that we get from the EU have to be accepted by the entire sector, and they have to be achievable. Otherwise, we will not get to our targets. No.
Yeah, thank you very much. So next, I'm going to turn to Dan Rutherford. Dan, you've researched climate and the climate and environmental impact of aviation for many years now. What do you see as the biggest areas of opportunity in the years ahead, both in terms of impact and the ability to get it done?
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks to Haldane as well for inviting me here today. So by word of introduction, I direct the aviation and maritime shipping programs at the International Council on Clean Transportation. So if you caught it there, I have the honor of working on not one, but 2 of the hard-to-abate sectors that you also often hear reference to. But we definitely are keeping busy these days. There's a lot of exciting developments in the field, really more than I can easily track myself. Regarding the biggest opportunities ahead, a number of times today we saw a slide showing the various technology roadmaps to get to net zero aviation by mid-century. If you look carefully, there was a bar from the ICCT. It was our breakthrough scenario. If you look at those roadmaps collectively, there's pretty consistent messaging that, first of all, that getting to net zero aviation by 2050 is possible. That's point one. Point two, that clean fuels will play a central role in making that goal. And then finally, three, that significant policy intervention will be needed. To talk a little bit about the clean fuels part of the puzzle, I couldn't agree with you more, Rob. I think we do really need to recognize both that sustainable aviation fuels will be central to solving this problem, but that we have to be very deliberate about the integrity of those fuels. We should not put ourselves in a position where we are prioritizing quantity over quality of the SAFs. And I think you all know the reason why. I mean, SAF is an umbrella term that hides a lot of diversity in terms of feedstocks. And it's quite possible to have SAFs with near zero emissions. Conversely, it's also quite possible to create a sustainable aviation fuel that has life cycle carbon intensity comparable to or worse than conventional jet fuel. And so we really need to have a way to make sure that we distinguish between those types of fuels. And maybe calling back to Conrad's point a second ago, and also a point that Jane Hupe made this morning, I mean, there is a robust international framework for life cycle assessment of fuels. And we do think it's very valuable and important to stick to that agreement and not go out of our way to create new life cycle assessment methodologies at the country level that favor one particular fuel over others. Beyond that, I am particularly excited about a couple of recent developments. First of all, the push for greater transparency in emissions data from the aviation sector, and then also a move towards the adoption of interim targets for the sector. So there's a great volume of research that shows that there actually, even today, are material differences in the carbon intensity across carriers and across flights. So to give you one example, according to analysis that we released about 4 years ago, if you look at US routes, there's significant diversity in the carbon intensity of flights, such that a traveler domestically within the US could reduce the carbon per trip attributed to them by somewhere between 22 and 63%, just by choosing a less emitting flight. And so we're really heartened to see the development of more and more tools to provide that information directly to consumers so that they can reward airlines that make early investments in low carbon technologies. Put in a plug, I am leading ICCT's partnership with Google to help refine their travel impact model. And that's being used now across Google Flights and a few other booking platforms to provide that emissions estimate in a transparent, comprehensive, and validated way. I'll put in the plug. We are doing 2 events later on today in the Green Zone, one at 4:15 and one at 5:15 in the Innovation Hub and the Climate Finance Hub, if you'd like to learn more about that. I'm also quite bullish on the adoption of interim targets because if you sort of think about this like as Goldilocks, a short-term target like a carbon neutral goal from 2020 tends to favor offsetting, which Lauren made the point earlier that offsetting, it has certain merits, but it's fundamentally divorced from the challenge of actually decarbonizing aviation itself. Conversely, if we go too far out, if we only have a 2050 target, we're lacking sort of the interim milestones to make sure that we actually are developing the technologies we need to get there. So I'm quite happy to start to see some interim targets coming in. I mentioned that I do cover shipping. ICAO went first and agreed to a net zero 2050 goal last year. Recently, the International Maritime Organization also adopted a net zero goal, but to that added pretty aggressive 2030 and 2040 indicative checkpoints. And I think that's an example of, coming from the shipping sector, that the aviation sector should also start to think about. Finally, ICCT has been involved in developing the well below 2 degree and 1.5 degree pathways under the Science Based Targets Initiative. So if you're familiar with those, that provides a framework for airlines to make midterm, so 2035 carbon intensity reduction goals. And that's been a really interesting learning experience for us. So we now have, I think, about 10 airlines that have signed up to the well below 2-degree pathway. Unfortunately, we do not yet have an airline that has formally adopted the 1.5-degree pathway. It's sort of thinking through why that is. It's inevitable reality. 1.5 is going to be more challenging than well below 2 degrees. But my personal conclusion actually is that a 1.5-degree pathway is going to be much more viable if we do start to credit non-CO2 reductions. So specifically, find a way to reward airlines that are abating contrails. And this goes back to your fourth point, Rob, earlier. So I think you may have heard the news. There was a study announced by Breakthrough Energy, Google, and American Airlines where they did a pilot project and concluded that it's possible through rerouting of aircraft to cut contrail impacts by half with a very small fuel burn penalty. So I think what I'd like to see is more thought about how to integrate contrail abatement in particular into these reduction targets. So in summary, yes, getting high integrity SAFs, increasing transparency of emissions, getting more interim targets in place, and then having really a close look at contrail abatement, I think are the most promising opportunities.
Thanks, Dan. I was thinking you'd make a good guest on a late night show because you've got everything in there, including some cross-marketing for your events this afternoon. Well done. But, you know, I think just to pull on two threads, the SAF credibility piece is so important, right? The credibility in accounting, that's what's going to make SAF work. I think everybody agrees, but we still need to get that right. And one of the challenges he referred to ICAO's life cycle methodology, and that's a really important point you make. It's also a real challenge, as we know, some of the areas like indirect land use and others have evolving research, right? And so how do you, we're not going to have a harmonized global harmony is a tough thing, but we aim for that, right? So we have as much harmony as possible while also realizing that the best practices and research are going to evolve. So it's easy to say, it's hard to do, and it's something that we're really focused on. And then your other point, that's a whole other topic that's really important, is this sort of transparency, data, and information. And it's a really, in my perspective, is sort of another another lever for addressing the sector's decarbonization objectives that we really are starting to tap into but need to do a lot more of. So that's great work. Last but not least, we're going to turn to Faustine de la Salle from the Mission Possible Partnership. And they've done work across hard-to-abate sectors on decarbonization roadmaps. So, you know, really interested to hear your perspective, because you're thinking, you don't only focus on aviation, you actually focus on a lot of topics. So you may be able to think about ways in which aviation's unique or alike, and we're just eager to hear your perspective.
Yes, I have the pleasure to work not only on one, not on two, but on 7 heavy emitting industry and transport sectors at the same time. And it's always fascinating to join the conversations in the aviation sector, given the momentum that we see in this space. What we've been focusing on very heavily over the last 12 months is how do we get steel in the ground for projects, for assets, and in the aviation sector specifically for sustainable aviation fuel plants. One of the difficulties we're having, everyone who has spoken on the stage, I think today, has spoken about the need to scale sustainable aviation fuels, recognizing that there are multiple pathways with different carbon intensity attached to it and different challenges per pathways. The real difficulty is that I think we've seen a first wave of investment in sustainable aviation fuels that have benefited from a whole range of first mover advantages. And it's tremendous because it has enabled progress in terms of technology, but it has benefited from great level of policy support at national level, has benefited from premium demand from a number of airlines that really wanted to show the way. It has benefited obviously, as well, from the willingness of a number of energy players to start investing in that space and developing their knowledge base and their IP in that space. But those first movers conditions are, I think, drying out, unfortunately. We have, I think, a bigger challenge for that next wave of investment that we need before 2030 in a much bigger number number of plants than what we have up and running today. And so the way we've been thinking about it in aviation and in other sectors, and I'll draw some comparisons, is what are the different levers we can play with to see investment flowing, even if the product is still more expensive than the grey alternative. And we know in aviation that the sustainable aviation fuels will remain for the foreseeable future more expensive than conventional jet fuel. Even though the cost can come down. So the idea is to really get to a scale where we can start seeing costs come down. And I think one of the advantages of aviation in that context is blending. This is not an opportunity that you see easily in the steel or in the cement sector. It's either you're green or either you're not, but you have to face the full cost immediately in your product. Whereas through blending, I think there's a more progressive path for aviation where you can use blending plus energy efficiency that was mentioned earlier as a way to mitigate your cost and progressively augment the quantity of sustainable aviation fuels as costs come down. So I think that's a real opportunity for aviation that doesn't quite exist even in the maritime sector, because in the maritime sector you have to have a different engine to use sustainable maritime fuels. You can't blend into the same engine or it's much more difficult. The other thing that I think is important is access to clean energy feedstock. And we've spoken about that earlier today. The struggle with the bio-based feedstock is really their availability and the fact that there is a high competition for access to those bio-based feedstock. Whereas for power to liquid, which is obviously less technologically advanced and therefore more costly today, there is a perspective of cost reduction, because in the end, for power to liquid and for hydrogen, you're relying on renewable electricity with costs coming down, hydrogen with costs coming down. So you'll benefit as a sector from the technology progresses that are achieved thanks to other hydrogen off-taking sectors that can then benefit technologies that will benefit the sustainable aviation fuel sectors. And the final point I wanted to make was on the demand side. I think a lot of the progress has been made in this sector thanks to voluntary demand, which is tremendous. But I have a big question mark on my mind on how far we can push that voluntary demand, especially for advanced fuels that come with a higher premium. And what we've seen tracking progress, and I'm sure many of you have noticed that over the past few years, is that the intervention of the blending mandate in Europe has really been a trigger point for investment in the sustainable aviation fuel value chain. So we shouldn't lose track of the power of regulation in this space to create that demand pool. And that's where the recent ICAO announcements are also very encouraging, because they point the way towards regulation on the bigger scale.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, we are sort of right at 2 o'clock, and we're going to take a little bit more time with this panel, but I'm also mindful of all of you who have sort of like stuck it out with us in this session and probably have other things on your agenda, so we won't go too long. But I think it was great to hear the different perspectives, and again, like, we could have a long conversation with this group. I'm gonna spring a question on everyone that they're not prepared for. So I'm gonna filibuster a little bit as I stated. But we talked about interim targets in 2030, and I think each of you hit on this a little bit. But thinking about the recent ICAO target at CAF3, which was a really important signal, but given the short duration between now and 2030, is going to be really challenging to achieve globally. If anybody thinks that a 5% emissions intensity reduction from aviation fuels by 2030 is not ambitious or not easy or is just going to happen, they're just wrong if they look at the facts on the ground. On the other hand, we know we need to do that and more. So it's sort of that tension of how do you be ambitious, but when you get to 2030, you're focusing on what you can do in the coming years. So the question is really about what you're thinking about in terms of the one or two things. If you look to 2030, what do we need to do? What when you're in 2030, would you say would be really kind of significant achievements by the sector if they're things that we can actually accomplish between now and then? And so I won't just go down the line. I'll let the first person who's interested. Oh, Dan raised his hand first, and then Rob. Not a surprise to me that both of you raised your hands first.
True to form. Thank you for the question, Kevin. I mean, I would continue to sort of focus on the need for sort of binding interim targets, the value of transparency, certainly short-lived climate pollutants as an abatement mechanism. But I mean, completely agree with you that, you know, a global 2030 goal for 5% reduction in the carbon intensity of fuels, that's tough. I mean, that is tough. But we do very clearly have a mechanism by which to achieve it. There's already basically a mandate that would meet this goal. It's called Refuel EU. I think you're all probably quite familiar with it. It requires a 6% volumetric target for airlines flying out of Europe, all departing flights. So this would include international flights. If you kind of do the math, and we often hear that the ballpark figure that SAFs can provide up to an 80% reduction in life cycle emissions. So you multiply a 6% volume mandate by an 80% reduction, and you've got a 5% fuel carbon reduction. So I think the quick and simple answer is, if we are all behind a 5% reduction in carbon intensity at a global level, we should be thinking very seriously about having regional SAF mandates applying to all departing flights. That's based upon, well, very similar to the structure of the Refuel EU mandate.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, the 2030 5% reduction, it's an amazing thing that's done at CAV3, and we need to push for that. But you're also right, we need to push for other things to do by 2030 to unlock the future. And I think the thing I'd say is, in a disrupted sector with high rates of technology change, we mustn't get trapped in the present. Those experiments we do by 2030 will unlock new futures, and that's what the sort of modelling shows. And so we've got to be experimenting at the edge of the bell curve. And the two areas I would experiment in is I'd experiment in contrails. Switching off contrails or contrail mitigation, getting a global system up and running by 2030, I think is very important. It's up to half the effect. The uncertainties are large, but it is a big benefit. And I would experiment on advanced hydrogen engines. They offer potential for a 20% energy per passenger kilometre reduction below conventional aircraft, and that would be a huge unlock. And finally, to plug, at 4 o'clock today, in the climate finance zone, we're going to demonstrate the tool with the 4 unlocks if you want to come. So please come along. Sorry, Dan.
Nicely done. Now, next I'm going to go to Veronica.
Yeah. We've discussed a lot about what the sector has to do, but I think that if we want to be sure that by 2030 we're going to achieve the targets, every company, every organization should think about its own targets and as soon as possible get it certified. So this is something that we did. Our group, Mundis, has had its target approved by Science Based Target Initiative, and this is something that obliges all the companies within the group, including, of course, our company, our airport in Rome, to take clear targets not only on scope 1 and 2, but also on scope 3, meaning landing and takeoff, for example. If every company starts doing this and starts having its target approved by Science-Based or whatever other science-based initiatives exist, this means that everyone will do its own part trying to achieve this target. So that's what popped up.
Thank you so much. Conrad, you've got the mic.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So I alluded to this earlier. I mean, there's a huge regional imbalance in the terms of supply and production of SAF. So if you talked about Europe and North America, where the vast majority of the production will be in 2030, no problem. You'll do much better than 5%, far better than 5%. But the issue is that in most parts of the world, there is no construction whatsoever. So here we are in 23, almost 2024. If we say that it takes 5 to 7 years to build a SAF production plant, it's totally unrealistic to expect certain parts of the world to be able to hit a 5% target. So I think that's really the sort of the stumbling block in terms of that one. And I think on the part of the industry, we're committed to 2050. And I think that your point, Dan, about having further interim targets is a good one as well. It's one of the things we actually spoke to ICAO about, but it was too difficult at the time to actually negotiate within the time frame for CAF3. But certainly there needs to be more spacing so that we can see and map out a path towards 2050 in a way that really works. So I think those would be the most important things. And just on Faustine's point, in terms of blending, this is a really good idea. And if one of the issues with the really sort of highly advanced approaches is that the cost is very high. So if we can find a way to reduce that cost and sort of build a gentler slope, that would be very good. Finally, I loved Aeroporto di Roma's Italy thing yesterday, and we had the Italian government saying we want to be pragmatic, we want to be affordable. And what they were really talking about was that our industry is fantastic. It connects the world. We don't want to price it at such a level that we disconnect the world. So that means that we need to find a way to get, whether it's blending, whether it's new technologies, to be able to make it, to continue to have it as affordable. Sure, it's going to be more expensive, but let's not price it to a point where actually people can't afford to travel anymore. As an industry, we've done an astonishing job in terms of making aviation affordable to pretty well everybody. Let's not destroy that. And let's build our way towards a sustainable future, but do it in a way that works and continues to draw the benefits of aviation in terms of the overall economy.
Thanks. Faustine.
I'll be tougher, because if we want to have achieved our targets by 2030, we actually need final investment decisions by 2026, 2027. So I think that's the timeline we're looking at if we're serious. And we need several hundred sustainable aviation fuel plants to have been sanctioned at FID level by 2026, 2027 at the latest. We're not that far in terms of publicly announced projects. So what's required now is collaboration across the industry, and I think one of the strengths of the industry is the really deep collaboration already existing across the different players in the value chain to ensure that all of those plans that have been announced actually appear and materialize.
Thank you. And Rob Johnston, we're going to give the last word to you.
Thank you very much. I was just going to echo some of the words of Conrad. There is very much a regional dimension to this as well. So it's not like for like. And I think the last thing I would say is, there is a narrative which says the industry is reluctant to change or needs to be forced to change, but we've seen today that is not the case at all. But we're also realistic and pragmatic and know that we have to change within the framework. So to set some arbitrary targets which aren't listening to the industry, aren't listening to the pace of the change, and don't provide the ingredients to allow that change to happen, it's just not realistic. So I think it's better to allow the industry to do what it needs to do, to listen, to keep the dialogue open, and then work on the infrastructure which is needed there to allow the change to happen within the period that we've already designated. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists. Round of applause.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, and the rest of the panel there as well. We covered a lot of ground just in that one panel, but we've also covered a lot of ground across the rest of the day as well. And I hope this half day at least has provided you with a good understanding of the breadth of what we're trying to achieve in aviation. These things are never easy, and no part of the climate challenge is. COPs are where the world comes together to find a way to meet the Paris Agreement goals. I hope you've seen today that aviation at least is committed to playing its part in that system-wide decarbonisation. Air transport is always referred to, and we've heard it a couple of times today, as a hard-to-abate sector, due to the fact that we don't have these off-the-shelf solutions for decarbonisation. But while meeting the goal in 2050 of net zero CO2 emissions is a significant challenge, our sector actually has a history of collaborating to overcome difficulties, and our energy transition is no different. We have a plan in place. We're working to execute that strategy in a number of different ways, as you've heard throughout today. But we need others to come on board as well. And it's one of the reasons why we are here at COP. We need government policy, we need finance, and we need particularly the energy sector to also step up with a collaborative approach that can secure connectivity for the world, but in a low carbon way. One of the key debates in the wider COP28 negotiations right now is the question of phasing out of fossil fuels. And I think we're pretty clear. We need to work on a phase out of fossil fuels for aviation by 2050. It's a massive challenge. All sectors of the economy, and it's a massive challenge, especially for an industry like aviation. But it is one that we are committed to, so we can connect the world in a carbon-free way in decades to come. So thank you once again for coming along to our session today, hearing all about what we're doing. Thank you to the supporters for their contributions, making today possible, the moderators and all of our speakers as well, and thank you for sharing in this. And we'll be around for a little while outside afterwards if you want to keep the conversation going. We also have some more resources available through the Waypoint 2050 report that's been mentioned a few times, and also the Aviation Benefits report as well. And the presentation is also already on the website, so you can download that and see what has been shared today. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of your transport day at COP.